Welcome everybody to Orient Association's Water Forum. Some of you may know that back in 2022, a group of Orient members recognized that our water resources were a key defining element of Orient Hamlet and that we needed to better understand the state of our waters and their future. And so the Water Project was born. Over 80 generous donors made it possible to contract with CDM Smith, a global engineering firm with deep knowledge of Long Island's natural resources, to research and publish a detailed study of Orient's relationship to its waters. I can't thank enough our many donors. Without you, this would not have happened. But nothing is static. Along the way, forever chemicals were discovered in many wells, and thankfully the county and state have been exceedingly helpful with mitigation. We also learned of the possibility that public water might be brought to Orient. These issues and many more are addressed in our water report. We all went into this process with certain assumptions and were often surprised not only by some of the report's findings, but also the nuances behind these findings and the range of possible solutions presented. The water report has been a learning experience for us and will be for you. We're glad to have everyone here to learn and explore three of the important topics within the water report. As always, Orient Association's mission is to inform and educate so that each of you can come to your own conclusions about the future of Orient's waters. We're really grateful that a number of our elected representatives are joining us today. I'd like to welcome Catherine Stark, our county legislator, Al Krupski, Southold's town supervisor, Liz Galuli, a Southold trustee, and three board members, Ann Smith, Greg Dorosky, and Brian Mealy. And if I've left anybody out, I apologize. I also see that some of our candidates running in the upcoming election are here. You'll have an opportunity to mix it up with the audience, but in the breaks between panels. Also want to thank Poquatuck Hall for allowing us to hold this forum here. They're holding their Oysters and Sparkling 2025 annual fundraiser this evening at 5 p.m. tonight, right here in Poquatuck Hall. You'll get more than a taste of the amazing oysters Orient's waters produce every day. Within Orient is our hardworking Water Project Committee who shepherded this project to completion. They deserve our undying thanks. And representing them, I'm going to turn this over to Daniel Watts, who will kick off today's forum. Thank you.
Super. Good morning, everybody. So I've been given the task of, since today is really based on this water report that we've produced over the past couple of years, we wanted to start out with just a quick summary of it because, as you might have noticed, it's quite long. I don't know who in the room has read the full report from beginning to end. Very, very impressive, but unlikely. We set out in 2021 to answer three basic questions about Orient's water. Can people hear me in the back? Okay, Greg, can you hear me? Okay. And those three questions are quantity, do we have enough of it? Quality, how polluted is our water, our drinking water? How clean is it? And then thirdly, we had a question about the bays that surround us and the health of the bays that are around us. Those are our three questions: quantity, quality, and health of the bays. And on that first question about quantity, we learned first that Orient, you may know this, but Orient has a very thin aquifer underneath it. We only have access to the upper glacial aquifer, and it's a very, very thin aquifer. The rest of Long Island has deeper, thicker aquifers, but ours is both thin and near the surface and very fragile. And so that was the first thing we learned about quantity. Second, we learned CDM Smith, that did a terrific job for us, did what's called a water balance. And they calculated the amount of water that falls on the land and the amount that we extract from our aquifer. And in theory, those two things should be in balance. And what they found was that of the water that falls on Orient's soil every year, we use less than 15% for both agricultural and residential uses. And in their opinion, that was a pretty good balance, a pretty healthy balance. And to check that, we were very lucky in that the US Geological Survey keeps a test well out on Main Road. And they know since 1957 the level of the water table. And when an aquifer is overtaxed, that water table will often fall. And you'll see here over on the corner there, there's a graph of all of the water table heights since 1957. It's been very steady, which is an indication that we haven't been overtaxing the aquifer, that our use has been in line with the amount of water that falls on the land. So the overall conclusion about quantity was that we don't have much water, but we've been using a reasonable amount of it, and we're more or less in balance here in Orient. We wouldn't want to use a whole lot more than we currently use, but we're in a healthy balance. So that was quantity. Quality, what CDM Smith did was they took all of the data from private well tests over the past 20 years here in Orient and took a look at all of the different contaminants that had been found over those years. And the basic conclusion from that work was there have been issues over time. More or less, the water's in pretty good shape. Nitrogen is too high. About 20% of the wells tested had too much nitrogen. And then while we were doing the study, the PFAS issue came up. So the conclusion there was Orient's water is in pretty good shape, but because it's shallow and thin, the aquifer is very much subject to contamination, and we need to be very, very careful about it. And then on the topic of saltwater health, the health of the bays around us, which isn't the topic for today, but just to summarize that, we found something that was surprising to me, having read about the difficulties that many of the other places in the Peconic Estuary have with quality. The quality in Orient's harbor is actually quite high. Nitrogen levels are below the levels that cause concern, and oxygen levels are quite high. And so I guess because we're out on the edge of the island, the bay gets flushed regularly by the tides. Our harbor is in good shape. So today we have a chance in person to meet with really the experts that know most about these issues and to delve into the most important topics that came out of the water study. First, contaminants and PFAS. And so we have a panel on contaminants and PFAS. Secondly, seawater rise and the chance for saltwater intrusion into wells. We'll have a panel on that. It's very, very important. And thirdly, because recently it's been announced that the Water Authority has possible plans of bringing a pipeline to Orient, we're going to focus on that and talk about both the possible positive benefits and also the drawbacks of having public water in Orient. We're super lucky today to have, I think, all of the experts that we would want on these topics here with us. I'm really, really grateful that folks from the USGS, from the DEC, from the Suffolk County Department of Health, from the town of Southold, from the town of Shelter Island, from the group for the East End, and from CDM Smith have all come to share their expertise with us. So really, really grateful to them for volunteering their time to be with us this morning. We hope that at the end of the day, you all have more information than you did when you came in about these topics that are so important to us, both as you make individual decisions about whether to filter your water or how often to test or whether to water your lawn, and also as we as a community make decisions about bigger, longer-term things like shared septic or shared water or any solutions that we might need to come up with to the problems that we face. So with that, we'll take a short break as the panel gets set up. But no break, you're just going to go straight through it? Okay. We have our panel on PFAS and contaminants, and Barbara is going to lead that. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Barbara Friedman. I'm the Vice President of the Orient Association, and was very involved in the water committee that put together our water report. Today, we've asked, these representatives from, the topic is the contaminants of concern, such as PFAS and nitrates. Lost my water bottle. Okay. And we've asked these representatives from Suffolk County Department of Health Services and the state DEC to talk about two contaminants of concern identified in the Orient Water Resources Study. PFAS, which is a, thank you. PFAS, which is a group of compounds that are used in firefighting foam, nonstick cookware, water and stain resistant clothing and fabrics, paints, adhesives, sealants, varnishes, and notably for us here in Orient, also on sails. Nitrates are naturally occurring in our bodies and in the soil, but excessive nitrates in groundwater and surface waters come from fertilizers and human waste. Health risks from PFAS include reduced immunity, some cancers, decreased fertility, and developmental delays in children. High nitrate levels can cause blue baby syndrome, which is an indication of lack of oxygen. Our two panelists from Suffolk County Department of Health Services are Jason Heim and Andy Andrew. I don't know if I can call you Andy. Andy Rapaco. Jason is the chief of the Office of Water Resources and principal public health engineer with the Health Services Division of Environmental Quality. He administers the inspection and sampling of the public water supply systems in Suffolk County to ensure they meet drinking water standards, and his department samples private wells upon request and as part of private well surveys. He also administers the evaluation of groundwater threats to the quantity and quality of the county's sole source aquifer to identify potential and emerging issues. Andrew is an associate hydrogeologist and with the Division of Environmental Quality, Office of Water Resources, and is the supervisor of the Bureau of Groundwater Investigation and Management. In this role, his team of hydrogeologists, public health sanitarians, well drilling crews, and office support staff conduct scientific research projects and studies to evaluate environmental threats in Suffolk County. He plans and directs the installation of monitoring wells as part of groundwater investigation studies and acts as a department representative at public meetings regarding cleanups, contamination, and spills related to groundwater resources. We also have two panelists from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, Division of Environmental Remediation, Bureau A. They are Robert Bellotti and Melissa Sweet. And I'm very grateful to them for coming here from Albany. I thought they were on Long Island, but they came all the way from Albany. Robert is the project manager at the DEC overseeing the Orient PFAS remediation project. He's been with the DEC for 4 years, overseeing investigation, remediation, and site management of state-regulated inactive hazardous waste disposal sites, brownfield cleanup program sites, and US EPA Superfund sites. He holds a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from SUNY Buffalo and has additional experience in radioactive contamination through the US Navy. And hopefully that's not a problem here. Melissa is the section chief of Bureau A, and she has been with the DEC for 18 years, overseeing the investigation, remediation, and site management of state-regulated inactive hazardous waste disposal sites, brownfield cleanup programs, and US EPA Superfund sites. She's a licensed professional engineer, holds a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Clarkson University, and has over 23 years of experience in contaminated site remediation. And all these people are involved in the Orient. Jason headed up our PFAS surveys, and also when you call for a well test, that's his department that does the well testing. And once again, let me stress, do it every year. Andy was responsible for the testing, monitoring to find out the flow of water to determine the source of contamination of PFAS. And Robert and Melissa are overseeing the potential cleanup. So, questions, Jason or Andy? According to the Orient Water Resources Report, 18% of the wells tested between 2014 and 2021 had levels above the maximum contamination level for nitrates, and 54% exceeded the suggested Suffolk County Department of Health Services level of 6 milligrams per liter. Can you describe the two different metrics and compare these levels to other places on Long Island? Jason or Andrew?
Sure. Everybody can hear me okay? Just before I answer the question, I just have a statement from the county executive. County Executive Romaine unfortunately couldn't be with us here this morning. He had a conflict in his schedule. He wanted to send his best wishes for a successful meeting, discussion on these critical issues. And he's going to stand ready to work with us in the Suffolk County Health Department, Orient Association, the community, to try to develop the best path forward and protect and enhance Orient. So I just wanted to share that statement from the county executive. But yeah, that's a good question. We have these different benchmarks out there, the 10 milligrams per liter for nitrate. That's all about, that's the drinking water standard for nitrate. That's the level that we feel is a concern for young children, 6 months of age or younger, consuming those nitrates because of that disease you mentioned. Blue baby syndrome, which is hemoglobinemia. The other benchmark that we use is 6 milligrams per liter. That's based off of our Article 6 of our Suffolk County Sanitary Code. And that's the goal that we want to see based on development throughout the county, except for a couple areas in Brookhaven and the Hamptons, which are at a lower benchmark. 6 milligrams per liter is that benchmark based on development in our sanitary code, where we don't want to see it get above that. If it gets above the 6 milligrams per liter, we recommend those areas for public water main extension projects, working with different public water suppliers that we regulate in Suffolk County. We worked with Marianne Taylor and her team at CDM Smith to do our 2015 Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan. In that report, she took a lot of the data, her and her team took a lot of that data that we have generated through all of our testing programs at the county. And what they told us is that 75% of the private wells in Suffolk County at that time were down below that 6 milligram per liter standard. And just to give you an idea, there are nitrate impacts out there above the drinking water standard in public supply wells. Across Suffolk County, we regulate 900 public water supply wells at places like, Crosstown Ferry here in Orient, the post office, and what used to be Opties and Dinghies, the Yacht Club, but also the Suffolk County Water Authority and other major water suppliers. So there's 900 public supply wells that we're out testing and checking every year to make sure that the water meets standards. There's 3 community water supply wells that have gone above for the nitrate standard, and water suppliers are taking action through treatment, or they're blending it with other well sources to try to get that level down below the standards. And then there's 5 small public water suppliers out there that had levels above that 10 milligram per liter standard. They're also required to take action.
Okay. Next question for Jason or Andy. Most of these questions the beginning ones are for Jason and Andy. Then we'll deal with remediation after. the water resources, the Orient Water Resources Report says that 93 out of 194 wells in the Orient Village Survey area had PFOA or PFOS, the two most common types of PFAS, above the maximum contamination level. And by the way, there are thousands of different types of PFAS. What prompted the survey to begin with? And two, are there any updates on those figures?
Sure, I'll take this one. So the private well survey was initiated following some analytical test results that we received from a test well that had been installed for I think a property that was going to be developed. And then we had test well data from folks like yourselves that have private wells out here in Orient, and they submitted an application to our office for a $100 fee. They got their water sampled, and some of those were above the maximum contaminant level. And some of those other non-community public water supply systems I mentioned, we had analytical test results from those systems, including the Opties and Dinghies, the post office. They were above the New York State drinking water standard for PFOS and PFOA. Those are the two regulated PFAS compounds right now in New York State with enforceable drinking water standards. And so it was initiated based on the data that we had from the non-community, the private wells, and the test wells. We shared that information with our hydrogeologist team in our office, led by Andrew Rupeco.
Can I just add one thing?
Sure.
That was very confusing to me in the beginning. Non-community means community. Non-community is like a public place.
Yeah, I remember having that discussion. So there's in the sanitary code, there's a whole definition on what a public water supply is. Essentially, if it serves over 25 people, or it has a certain number of connections, service connections, then it's regulated as a public water supply system. You know, if you have over a certain number of days out of the year. So yeah, those are some of the local businesses and such. So the PFAS compounds, as you mentioned, there's thousands. The last estimate I heard, there's over 9,000 different PFAS compounds. We're testing for somewhere in the 30s in drinking water samples. I think a little over in the 40s, maybe in groundwater right now with the different work that we do. But the focus has been on the PFOS and PFOA. So yes, we've done some additional testing in the Orient. I think we're calling it the Orient Harbor Survey. And we've done, I think 201 wells have been tested in that area, 97 of which now are above the New York State drinking water standards. When we find out, and many of you probably already know this, when we find a well that's over the New York State drinking water standards, we coordinate with the New York State Department of Health, New York State DEC, and then they've been offering alternate water supply to those folks that have been impacted over the drinking water standard. But we do have several of you. I think it's also in the 90s out of those 200 that have been sampled. Because I think only 9 had no detection for PFOS or PFOA. But the rest of you have been between non-detect, which is around 2 parts per trillion, up to the drinking water standard of 10 in that community. We've also found 20 nitrate exceedances, 8 chloride exceedances, and the highest of which was like 616 milligrams per liter in that survey. To give you an idea, the drinking water standard is 250. So it's over twice that drinking water standard. And then other iron, manganese exceedances, and then several pesticide detections. Metolachlor, imidacloprid, dichlorobose, metalaxyl, aldecarb degradates, including sulfone and sulfoxide, and TCPA detected in the survey area.
E. coli.
Oh, absolutely. Not to mention the bacteria, which, you know, that's probably the most significant thing that we test for. I think that there's an acute public health hazard. If you have E. coli in your drinking water, let's say, that can cause pretty immediate effects, especially if you're immunocompromised. You know, we have E. coli in our bodies, but if we ingest it, we can become very sick. So that's one of the big things that we test for and look out for.
Okay, next question. Some people in this community with levels of PFAS above the MCL which is maximum contamination limit, have said that they were told not to bathe in their water until filters were installed. Do you know if this is true, and at what level of PFAS contamination would this recommendation be made to a homeowner?
So, yeah, Barbara was able to share that question with me beforehand, and I appreciate that she did that because I was able to speak to some of our staff in the Suffolk County Health Department. Carol Sarian leads our private well testing program in my office. And, she had indicated that that's not any advice that she's received from anybody or not anything that she shared. I spoke with our point of contact up in the State Health Department, Stephanie Selmer, who is in the Bureau of Environmental Exposure Investigation. And that's not a recommendation that the State Health Department has made anywhere in the state based on the PFAS concentrations that they've observed right now. She reaffirmed what she's told us in the past is that the biggest concern is with ingestion, drinking the PFAS compounds. So that's the biggest exposure risk right now to the PFAS. So that advice hasn't been given out by the state or Suffolk County Health Department.
What type of home filtration systems can be used for PFAS and nitrate? And what are the pros and cons of the different types of filters?
I'll take that one again.
Easy job.
So the biggest ones that we see out there, and a couple of these are actually used by the public water suppliers to deal with PFAS contamination of their wells. Granule activated carbon. It was identified by the EPA and State Health Department as the best available treatment technology. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation is also using this as part of their POET systems. You guys may know that term. It's the point of entry treatment systems that the DEC is putting in as the alternate water supply when you have maximum contaminant level exceedances. So, that's well known, well understood technology, well researched. It's been shown to be effective. The cons, and I think the cons, this is true to all these systems, that they require maintenance in order to be effective and continue to be effective. What we've seen is that you can actually observe higher levels of a contaminant on the effluent of the treatment once you get breakthrough of the granule activated carbon. Once all the little pore spaces and the carbon particles are used up, it will actually start to desorb and you'll get higher concentrations on the effluent. So you need to make sure that you're up routinely testing for those things and working with your filtration companies to replace that media. With some of the medias, we've actually seen, depending on where they're sourced, we've seen things like arsenic can come off of the carbon media. We've seen bacteria inside the carbon media coming off. I've actually seen contaminants other than things that are in the raw water. So things that are in the, like this has been like a non-community water supplier, the public water suppliers. If they have carbon on for a treatment, we require that they collect samples before and after the treatment. We've actually seen where the raw water upstream of the carbon treatment system doesn't have a contaminant, let's say, but we will see it on the effluent of the carbon treatment. So that's something that you need to be aware of, just watch out for. Other treatment systems, the Suffolk County Water Authority is actually pilot testing anion exchange resin. That's effective for nitrate and PFAS compounds. We want to do a little more research on that to make sure that it can handle the long chain and the short chain PFAS compounds. That requires regeneration. There is, a waste stream associated with that regeneration. Eventually, you may need to change out that media, similar to the carbon.
Can you talk about reverse osmosis?
Reverse osmosis, yeah, that was the third I wanted to talk about. Reverse osmosis, they're typically small units that you're only going to have around, let's say, your kitchen faucet. They're limited to the amount of water that they can put out. It may only be a couple gallons a day. And there's a fair amount of the water that's going to be lost and rejected through that filter. And those pre-filters need to be changed out more frequently than some of those other treatment systems. What I want to say about those. You have to be concerned with the reject water, that those tight pores and those membranes in the reverse osmosis filters. The reject water is going down typically into your on-site wastewater systems. So now you're almost recontaminating the aquifer with higher concentration chemicals. And now, you know, your private well can see that again, or maybe your neighbor's private well can see that again.
Okay. I think the next question might be for Andy. Can you talk about how you determine the source of PFAS contamination generally and specifically in the Orient Village or Orient Harbor survey area? And can you estimate how long the PFAS has been in the village groundwater?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Now you get to hear me. So PFAS pretty much has been a big part of my life since 2016 when we first encountered it at Kabreski Airport out in West Hampton. PFAS was developed in the 40s as part of the Manhattan Project. And I said that to some young whipper in my office. I said, you know what the Manhattan Project is, don't you? And they said, yeah, that's when they built like the Empire State Building. So for those, any millennials here, the Manhattan Project was actually the project that during World War II, we developed the nuclear bomb. So they discovered that this chemical had some really, really unique properties, and it has to do with the chemistry and the bonding, and I won't get all into that. I'm not an engineer, you know, so I won't bore you with the details there. But because it has these unique chemical properties, I mean, there's good and there's bad to it. It's good because, for instance, it's really resistant to heat. So you can heat it up a lot and it won't break down. So that's, you know, the Navy saw this and said, wow, because they're real concerned about fuel fires on their aircraft carriers, right? Because a fuel fire, you can't put water on it because it just spreads out the fuel and the fire. So you really have to smother it. So they're always looking for things that can smother a fire, and this chemical doesn't break down in fire. So it was used as firefighting foam, and then the other military branches saw that and said, wow, this is really good stuff. So they required, and they all blame the Navy for all the pollution that they're all dealing with now. So that's some good properties. It's resistant to oil, so it'll be put on for stain resistance, like it's in jeans, it's in fabric, carpets, because of that property. So those are some of the good things, and on the same token, it doesn't break down like in fire, but it doesn't break down. So typically chemicals like we're used to dealing with, like these solvents, these chlorinated solvents, they get into the ground and bacteria chews at them and breaks them down. It's a natural process from bacteria. And then it goes from hopefully the more toxic version, and it'll break it down through bacterial action. But bacteria doesn't break this stuff down because they don't get, it takes more energy for them to break the bonds than they get out of it. So once it's in the environment, it stays there. They're called forever compounds. So that's a big issue and a big problem. And like I said, they've been around for a long time. Probably, I mean, it was in the 40s where it was invented, but probably the 70s is when the military really started using it. And then other people picked it up. So you figure we have to worry about when our samplers are sampling for it, that they don't have any products that contain these compounds, because you can be picked up in the sample and then give an errant result and say, you think it's in your water sample, but it's really coming from your genes. So the protocol is they have to wash their genes like 5 or 6 times if they're new before they can go out and sample them. But then I think about this and I go, okay, you're washing your genes to get the PFAS off your genes, but you're probably putting that into a septic system, which is going into the groundwater, you know, so, and we're sampling the groundwater. So as you can see, you know, these compounds are real troublesome, and we're really at the very tip of this. I mean, yeah, it's almost been 10 years, but we are still finding it. We recently got, you know, the last couple of years, the ability to test for it. And good thing we were able to incorporate that into our private well program. And that's how a lot of these surveys like the one here, and this is just not the only one. There's a whole bunch of these going on throughout all of Suffolk County.
I think we're up to
90 surveys for PFAS. So what'll typically happen is Jason's group will find a private well that's impacted or two, and they'll come over to me and say, hey, do you think you should do a groundwater investigation? This is exactly what happened here. So we look at, the hydrogeology, and we look at which way the groundwater is flowing. And I'm going to give you all a secret. You're all going to be, this is the hydrogeologist's secret. How do we determine the groundwater flow direction? It's real complicated. If you go over to that second poster, second one from the left, you'll see it has hydrogeologic contours, which is the contours of the height of the water table. And if you look at those lines and you draw a line perpendicular to those lines, that's which way the groundwater is flowing. So there's my secret. So we look at that, and so we start putting in wells. And the first thing we did, I looked at the firehouse. I looked where the wells were, private wells were that were impacted. I looked at the flow direction. I traced it back, and I saw the firehouse. So the first well we put in was right in front of the firehouse, and we found the drinking water standards 10 parts per trillion for PFAS. We found 3,000. So I said, oh, and then the other thing we look at is we do a profile. We take multiple samples from one well, and if it's at the top of the water table, we typically know we're near the source. So we saw that 3,000 right at the top of the water table. So we said, okay, probably near the source here. And then we'll follow the groundwater flow down gradient to see and add wells and see to get the whole plume, picture of the plume, which is what we did. And we traced the plume basically to the harbor, which is about a half mile, 3,000 feet. And your question as to how long ago did this happen? So typically we say groundwater flows. The time it's about a foot a day. So you say 300 feet a year generally. Obviously that's gonna change. So if you do the math, which I did yesterday, or I should say I do it in my head right now. It's about 8 years or so, 7 or 8 years for the flow to get from around the firehouse to the harbor. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's when it was discharged, because it could have been discharging and been going into the harbor long before that. But that's basically what I could tell you. It's about 8 years of flow. So then
That's a minimum.
a minimum, because it's gone that far. But we also, so we add groundwater wells as we're tracking the plume, and I also evaluate the private well data concurrently as the private well guys are taking samples. I map those. I map the private wells where we're getting hits of those. I know where to put my monitoring wells, and we come up with a picture. When we get to the point, and this is not just in Orient, this is in many investigations we're doing across Suffolk County. When we get to the point where we think we have an idea of what may possibly be the source, then we talk to the DEC and we'll turn it over to them, and they'll evaluate that and determine if, is this a potential candidate for the Superfund program? And if they determine that it is, and that there's enough information, sometimes they'll come back and say, well, maybe you can get another well up gradient, so if we don't see it there, then we know in between is the source. Because they want to have enough information before they send that letter to the property owner and say, hey, welcome to the Superfund program, because nobody wants to get that letter. So at that point, it goes over into the Superfund program, and then we kind of take a step back, and the DEC will deal with the property owner, and then they'll typically require a full-blown investigation that this process is to, which I'm sure they'll talk about.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, maybe this is a tag team one. There are two.
Jason will handle it.
Okay. There are two smaller survey areas in Orient. Can you tell us more about the scope and level of contamination in those areas? And do you know the source of PFAS in those areas?
Sure. So I just want to say that Andy oversimplifies all the work that he does. And every time I go in and I ask him about the groundwater flow direction, he says, "Oh, it's complicated. It's complicated." Perpendicular. But yeah, we do have 3 total surveys, private well surveys going on right now in Orient. We still have non-responders in all 3 surveys. One is the Orient Harbor that we talked about. That's the large one. We've sampled 201 locations right now. The other 2 are Parkview Lane vicinity and North Sea Drive vicinity. They're further east out in the community. Unrelated, right, Andy? Not related to the source that we were looking at on the west. Hydraulically, that wouldn't make sense. We don't know what the sources are right now, but the Parkview Lane vicinity survey, these were initiated based on, again, another private well application that came in with a $100 fee. You can call us if you haven't yet, 631-852-5810, okay, and get your well tested. But we've sampled 9 out of the 12 private wells that we identified in Parkview Lane. There were 2 that were over the drinking water standard for PFAS and or PFOA, up to 37 parts per trillion. In that survey, the big survey, the highest concentration that we saw was 3,350 parts per trillion combined PFAS, PFOA. So this is quite, orders of magnitude lower concentrations, even though they are above the drinking water standard. There were 2 other wells with detections of PFAS or PFOA below the current New York State drinking water standards. And then there were 5 wells that had no detection. We did have 2 wells that had detections of nitrate above the drinking water standard in the Parkview Lane vicinity survey. The third one is the North Sea Drive vicinity private well survey. This one's a little bit bigger. Another private well application initiated it. We had 21 wells sampled out of the 26, and still 5 folks that haven't responded or were pending sampling or denied our request to sample. 7 wells in that private well survey, North Sea Drive, are above the maximum contaminant level. That went up to 31.1 parts per trillion combined, PFAS, PFOA. 9 other wells with detections below the maximum contaminant level, 4 with non-detects, and 1 result still pending at the analytical lab. And that one just had 4 other wells with detections of iron above the drinking water standard, which is naturally occurring. Happens periodically. It's essential nutrient, not a concern unless you have a medical condition called hemochromatosis.
Thank you. So we're going to move on now to remediation, which is Robert and Melissa's bailiwick. Robert or Melissa, can you describe the PFAS cleanup process? And by the way, there's a handout in the back from Robert and Melissa where you can access their website and sign up for updates. Can you describe the PFAS cleanup process?
Certainly. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So the PFAS cleanup process starts. I'm actually going to be going along with that little handout. So if you have it, you can follow along. If not, you can pick it up after. We start with what's called a site characterization, which is a very general, big picture look over a prospective site. We put samples of all different kinds of media, soil, groundwater, indoor air, and we will look for any potential contaminant on that site, whether we believe it'll be there or not. When we get the results from that, we then have an idea of the contaminants that are present. And then we move into a much more specific and localized examination called a remedial investigation. That is when we are attempting to define the nature and extent of contamination on the site. Where particularly is this contamination located? What depth? What's the geographical area? And once we have it properly defined, where we can say for certain this is where we have to be working, we're going to move on to what's called a feasibility study. And what that is acknowledging where we have these contaminants and what concentrations we have, and then start considering the remedial options we have available to us. based on the practicality of them. Are they going to clean up this level of contamination? Do they work in the environment that they are in? How long will they take? What will their cost be? Various other considerations that are woven into that decision-making process. Excuse me. The following step is New York State will issue what we call a record of decision, where we have decided what the remedial action will be moving forward, and we outline the specifics of what is required for the proper cleanup of the site. Once that has been established, the person taking charge of the cleanup, in this case, that is the Orient Fire Department, will submit what we call remedial design, which is the actual specifics of how they're going to carry it out. For example, if part of the record of decision says that we're going to do some soil excavation of, say, 3,000 square feet of soil or some number, the remedial design will show the actual schematic layout of where are you excavating, what are the dimensions, the depths, where are you sending that soil, all those nitty-gritty details will be in that documentation. And then finally, you carry out that remedial action, and then we will go in and take final samples to ensure that it actually has done what we wanted it to do. And we will declare the remediation completed, but then we move into the final step, which is called site management, where we believe the remediation is completed on site, but we keep our eyes on it, and every year we come back, test it, make sure that the cleanup worked, it did what it's supposed to do, we don't have any new contamination being added, and that it is completely protective of health and human safety.
Okay, thank you. And the next question is, where are we now in this process, and what is the anticipated timeline?
So at the moment, we are currently performing the site characterization at the Orient Fire Department, which is the first step in the Superfund process. We expect to have that completed report of what we have discovered there and the results submitted within the near future. When we do, that will be released to the public, both online on the resources on the handout, and it will be provided locally to a local document repository. We've not yet selected one, but when we do, public will be informed as well. Usually it is something like a library or some other public building where records can be stored.
When you say we, that the DEC isn't actually doing this investigation, that the fire department is.
That is correct. The fire department took charge of the investigation and entered into an agreement with the Department of Environmental Conservation that they will be the ones spearheading the investigation, and we will be overseeing the investigation as they perform it. They will also be taking on the costs associated with the investigation.
Okay, so that was my next question. How will costs be covered for the investigation and the cleanup?
So due to the fire department entering into that agreement with us, they have agreed to take on the responsibility for the investigation and for carrying out the cleanup, as we will provide oversight to ensure that it is properly protective of human health and the environment. As for where the cost will wind up, we're still in the very preliminary stages of the remediation process, so that's not really a question I can give a satisfactory answer to.
Okay, the next question is, based on your experience, what do you anticipate the remedy will be? And can the PFAS be eliminated completely? And how long will it take until the PFAS in the aquifer is at safe levels? It's 3 questions in one.
Thank you, Barbara. Everybody hear me okay on this one? Okay, great. Thank you. So there's different methods that we can approach for remediation. There is what's called in situ remediation, where colloidal carbon can be injected into the aquifer, and that will create a permeable reactive barrier in order to prevent further contamination of the aquifer in the area. The most common applied remedial action right now for PFAS has been groundwater pump and treat systems, where we remove groundwater from the aquifer and we treat it ex situ.
Okay, and how long do you think it will take? And can the PFAS be eliminated completely?
Oh, thank you. Well, we can't really say right now what the remedial action will be for Orient. We're still in the site characterization phase, so we still have a ways to go before we get to the actual selection of the remedy. Like Robert pointed out, we have to go through our remedial investigation. That can be a lengthy process, up to 2 years. And then the record of decision takes time as well to craft and select a remedy, and it goes through a series of levels of looking at, not only by DEC but also by New York State Department of Health as far as the selection of the remedy. And how long will it be until
Yeah, I don't know if you can answer that.
I can't answer that
how long
one.
it'll be
It's,
until-
like I said, it takes a couple of years for the actual remedy to be selected, and then it can also take quite a serious amount of time in order to implement that remedy.
And can you describe the Superfund process and what the public participation is in that process?
So the Superfund process, I just outlined a little bit before, the basic walkthrough of it. At every step of that process, when we receive and approve documentation, reports, work plans, advances of those, we will be releasing them to the public through both our online repository and through the document repository we select. And we will also intermittently release documents for public comment. When we release work plans for investigations or for remedial action, we will, or for a proposed remedy, we will put those out for the public to comment, and that is your perfect opportunity to ask any questions, concerns you have, whether you're concerned about if it goes far enough or if it's going to interfere with, things in your life. By all means, my contact information is included, so I look forward to hearing from you.
And
I also want to point out that
sign up for updates, right? And
Yes.
then you'll be notified that it's a
When it goes
public
out.
comment period.
right, yeah, we do have a sign up for our listserv where you'll find out any information about any sites that are in Suffolk County. I did want to point out in the public participation process that we actually do have a public meeting such as this, where we would, during the proposition and the selection of the remedy, for the public to come out and to voice any concerns they may have or questions. And then we would present what the remedy is, usually through a slideshow. Sometimes we have some posters like you do.
You're gonna copy us.
Okay. Yes, of course. Yeah. Yep. You
So
guys are,
will we
you
get
guys
a
are on our
letter like
list.
Andrew described, getting a Superfund letter in the mail? Oh, okay.
The fire. Oh yeah. The
Oh,
fire
okay.
department.
They're the ones who
But-
got the letter.
But
Okay.
yeah, if your group is, or any individual is signed up on our listserv, you will be notified of that public comment period, as well as the ability to come to the public meeting. And then as part of our record of decision, we also have what's called a responsiveness summary, where we list any public comments that may have been voiced during the meeting or the comment period.
Okay. So we're almost on time here. The last question, it's not really a question. We'll be talking about chlorides in the next session, but the Orient Water report touches on other contaminants of concern, some of which Jason already talked about, such as pesticides, herbicides, VOCs, pathogens, and other emerging contaminants, 1,4-dioxane. What should we all be doing now to prevent and detect harmful compounds in our private wells?
It's easy. Get your water supply tested. So definitely reach out, contact Suffolk County Department of Health Services, my office, Office of Water Resources. Our number again, 631-852-5810. If you're in a private well survey, one of the three that I mentioned, the fee will be waived. It's only a $100 fee. Go out to a contract testing company right now. They're going to charge you, could be close to $500 just for the PFAS compounds. And we do, if you have a treatment system for that same fee, we're doing before your filter and after your filter. If there's an accessible location where we can collect those samples. So absolutely test. I asked my staff to go through and do a query of our database just to see what the last 10 years of water quality looked like. They told me that we had sampled 288 different sites across Orient in the last 10 years. 102 of those private wells exceeded for the New York State drinking water standards. 1,4-dioxane, I'm glad you brought that up. We don't, fortunately, Joe Picorni will feel differently about this. He sees it in some of his wells out in western Suffolk County. But it's very rare that we found it in private wells in Suffolk County. There's been no detections of the 1,4-dioxane above the drinking water standard out of the 355 wells that we've sampled in Orient for that compound in the last 10 years. Nitrates, we've had over 10% have exceeded the drinking water standard. Chlorides, pesticides, as you mentioned. I think I mentioned several of those before. And then even volatile organic compounds. We've seen those many times, especially if it's new well or if you have work done on your well. You can find compounds like 2-butanone, which is methylethyl ketone, tetrahydrofuran, and those are related to some of the glues that could be used as part of the PVC well construction. And there's methods that the certified well drillers that are certified by not only the DEC, Region 1 in Stony Brook, but also our office. We certify them to make sure that they know what to do in the event they see a problem like that.
I just want to put in a plug also. The Orient Association has best practices for water resources, protecting your water resources on our website. It's a good way to review what you can do at home.
Is that like don't flush things down the drain, your pharmaceuticals, paint, stuff like that? That's good.
Yes, on our website, we have a best practices. And we are at our time. So thank you very much for everything, for coming. And I want to copy. We're going to take a very short break.
Yeah, we just need to keep going.
Okay, everybody, we're going to get started. I'm just going to start talking. All right, everybody. My name's Drianne Benner. I'm a member of the Orient Association Board. I do want to, so I can just take a minute here and thank individually. I want to recognize everybody. We're getting started. Really hard. Really hard sometimes. Once you take a break, people won't want to sit down again. I just want to tell you who is on the Orient Water Committee. Okay, everybody, that includes Tony. Again, I just want to recognize, I'm Drianne Benner. I'm a member of the Orient Association Board. I want to recognize individually the members of the Water Committee because we've been working really hard for at least, it seems many years, but I know it's only like 3, but it seems a long time. So Glynis Berry is on the Water Committee. Thank you. Barbara Friedman, who you just heard from, Aaron Latham Stanton, Daniel Watts, who you will be hearing from, Chris Wedge, who is over here, and then Bob DeLuca has been helping us as an advisor way back when. So again, thank you, members of the Water Committee, for your stamina and your patience and working through the many rounds of this report, which Mary Ann Taylor here has completed to our great satisfaction. So what we're talking about this moment, we're going to talk about saltwater intrusion, so saltwater in our private wells. And we're going to start with a bit of discussion. We'll have introductions, a bit of discussion, and then I'd like to open it up for any questions that you might have. But this is a picture of what it could look like if you have salt water in your well and if you start drinking it. This is actually something from 1970. This is a dredging project that was in Jamesport. Someone gave this poster to me and said, you should save it because this is going to happen in your wells eventually. So the study introduces saltwater intrusion. I just want to introduce the topic here because I'm just going to read from the study. And we talk about water quality and the vulnerabilities of our very thin aquifer to saltwater intrusion. So here we are. Climate change is expected to cause sea levels to rise 21 inches by 2050, 47 inches by 2100, which will cause the salt/freshwater interface to move upwards and inland. These two phenomena will shrink the size of the aquifer by about 20% and will increase saltwater intrusion into shallow and near-shore wells and could cause upconing in deeper inland wells. As sea level rises, the most vulnerable coastal properties in Orient may lose access to fresh water altogether. That is our topic today. The recommendations, and we will pretty much turn that topic over to Daniel's panel, but it's to monitor the saltwater interface and to conserve and protect and limit water use, especially in near-shore locations during the growing season and during droughts, as overpumping can cause saltwater intrusion and upconing. So the potential for chloride levels to increase, sea level rise will cause high chloride levels and water table rise. For some properties, the raised water table will put the bottom of the septic system too close to the top of the water table, increasing the chance of bacterial contamination of household wells and surrounding water bodies. So this is all the impact of some of these causes, one of which is sea level rise. So first, I'd like our panel of experts to introduce themselves as opposed to me introducing you. We're going to start with Fred, an expert hydrologist, then go to Mary Ann, who's from CDM Smith and the primary author of our water study, and then Joe Fenora, who's the Shelter Island engineer. So Fred, short introduction.
I'm not really, I normally work for the U.S. Geological Survey. I'm here today as a private citizen, but part of the USGS work is working with local government, Suffolk County, New York State, and we're currently finishing up a multi-year project. That was one thing that we can talk about, but overall, USGS works with local government to try to use some different technologies and and basically, just integrate some of that with any federal resources that are available to work with local government for the use and application for the citizens and residents of Long Island. So that's basically My background is a hydrogeologist. I do officially as a research hydrologist. We just apply different tools. My background is in geophysics and hydrogeology. So for salt water, sometimes you can't afford to put in wells, and we do different type of methods. And my background has been doing that for over 30 years with the USGS here on Long Island, and I've worked with a lot of people in this room, and hopefully we'll be able to continue that going forward.
Hi, I'm Marianne Taylor. I'm an engineer. I've been working in water resources on Long Island for about 45 years now. Had the pleasure of doing the Suffolk County groundwater model with Andy and Jason. Worked on the Suffolk County Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan, the Subwatersheds Wastewater Plan with the county, and had the pleasure of working with the Orient Association, learning about Orient's water supply and surface waters.
Hi everyone, I'm Joe Fenora. I'm the Shelter Island town engineer. I grew up in Mattituck. I live in Southold now with my family. I've been working, my background is actually in marine and coastal engineering, but I've been working with the town of Shelter Island now for the last 5 years. My role there is largely overseeing the town's infrastructure and assets, many of which relate to water. The town has a small water system that serves approximately 70 parcels, both commercial and residential. The town also has a series of non-community wells, which were touched on in the last session. Those are monitored directly by the Suffolk County Health Department, and those are the bulk of our municipal buildings. So I'm here today to talk with you about similarities in the geology, water quality, and water quantity issues that are similar to the community here in Orient. And my role there is not necessarily being an expert in any one particular issue, be it public health or geology or engineering, but to sort of oversee all those components, maintenance and upgrades to our water systems, compliance with our monitoring and water testing, and then dealing with the interfacing with the public on many of the social zoning and construction issues that relate from the larger water discussion. So I'm appreciative of the opportunity to speak with you, and I'll hand it back to you.
All right, so we're going to break this discussion up into a couple sections. First, we're going to talk about the nature of our aquifer and the fragility of our aquifer. And we're going to talk a little bit about the threats to that aquifer by saltwater intrusion, which is slow and insidious. It's not like a flood where you see it and it's a big event. It's a slow creeping process. So that calls for monitoring and testing. And then we'll talk a little bit about remediation, and we'll be hearing from Joe about experience on Shelter Island and what they've done, how they discovered saltwater intrusion and what levels were a cause for concern and what you did about it. And then we'll transition directly. We're going to skip a break and go right into the next panel, which is all about how do you address all of these things, including the contaminants that you heard about with Barbara's panel, and the saltwater intrusion. So Fred and Marianne are going to tag team with some slides on this first section. This is about the current drinking water situation in Orient. We're going to cover a couple of things. Where do we get our drinking water? What are the limits of our drinking water, our sole source aquifer? We're going to get some definitions of what is saltwater intrusion, what is salt, what is salt water, what causes it in general and specifically in Orient. We're going to talk a little bit about what are the differences between saltwater risks in shallow aquifers versus deep aquifers. Again, we're a small community. We have a thin aquifer, and that's what people here are most concerned about. Then we're going to talk, Fred will talk about how we map that interface and what is that interface between the salt water and the fresh water. And then again, we're going to go back to sea level rise. Where is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? And what areas of Orient are going to be most affected? So I'm going to turn it over for about 15 minutes to Marianne and Fred to go through the description of our aquifer and the threats. And I'll poke a little question in here and there if you guys haven't covered it. Marianne, Fred?
Shelter Island from west to east. And you can see, even though there's vertical exaggeration on this, 10 to 1, you can see. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much. Shelter Island looks different. I know that. Ooh. So, thank you. You can see how shallow your aquifer is. That this blue here, this was mapped using data, using water quality data collected by Suffolk County Department of Health Services, the USGS, and a model that puts it all together. At its deepest, you've got about 85, 90 feet thick of salt water, fresh water, but now I'm completely mixed up. Here on the west side, and more like 50, 55 feet on the east side. So it's not a lot of fresh water that you're working with. I have another slide here that will show you more exaggerated here. This is like in 2020. So below you, below this fresh water, is salt water. And it's coming in from around, you know, you're surrounded on the north by Long Island Sound, by Connick Bay on the east, Atlantic Ocean Connick Bay on the south. And kind of think of it like oil and vinegar, like if you're making salad dressing or something like that, you know how oil floats on top of the vinegar? The vinegar is a little more dense, the oil is less dense. Salt water is denser than fresh water, so the fresh water is kind of like sitting on top of that salt water. The interface, we call it the interface here, the boundary between the fresh and the salt water. It's not a sharp line like this. You can mix it up like you can mix up your oil and vinegar a little bit, so along the edges it gets kind of mixed together as you're pumping and whatnot. We're gonna use the drinking water standards that Jason mentioned before. 250 milligrams per liter of chlorides is defined as your as salty water. Now that drinking water criteria is not a health-based standard. That's based on taste and aesthetics. It's not like it's gonna be a problem. Salt water is 35,000 parts per thousand, right? 35,000.
We kind of break it up as fresh water, as we've been talking about, and then brackish water is kind of a transition zone. So like we've mentioned, some of the concentrations, you know, in the 600s or so, that would be what we would call like a brackish, sort of like a transition area. And then we have to define it somewhere, so we use roughly about 1,000 milligrams per liter chloride as our kind of beginning of what we would call salt water, but it's an arbitrary kind of number, and it gets into things at about 2,000 milligrams per liter chloride actually starts to affect the groundwater levels. So we really can't use wells when we're making these maps up as far as fresh water. We have to know the concentration of the well. If it actually is in salt water, it depresses that water level artificially in a way. It's kind of interesting. So, and as far as in general, that's kind of the range for salt water. So we use, again, chloride. And why do we use chloride? It's very conservative. It kind of really doesn't interact much in nature. So it's a good element to use. And seawater in general, if you think about salt, there's also another source we can talk about that is road salt. So you have a very constrained aquifer system. So Long Island is made up of, I guess I'll transition to the framework, but we just remapped Suffolk County. So it hasn't been looked at in 30 years. And USGS with DEC, the New York State DEC, partnered to put in a lot of these observation wells. These observation wells were used to map the framework. So we drilled to bedrock with split spoon core, and that's a generalization. So that's 30 years ago. The new maps will be coming out, and we've actually detected a new aquifer on Long Island. It extends in Suffolk County. It's below the Magathy system, but as far as Orient is concerned, we found a significant clay unit about 50 feet below sea level that's pretty extensive out under Orient. And the good news is it's a perfect barrier to the salt water. It's not going to be a perfect situation. Nothing in nature is absolute. And the borehole that we did drill was by the Oyster Pond School. We got permission at the school to drill on the property. We used it as an education kind of thing as well as for the students. That borehole, we did, well, I guess we'll transition into mapping too, but how do we know where the interface is? One way to do it is where we would use the water levels that we mentioned before, all those wells that get monitored. Well, in reality, there's not many wells available in Orient, and it traditionally hasn't had a lot of study or attention to it. So we did put in some other observation well, but we normally use how high that fresh water is above sea level. That pressure, that freshwater pressure is really what keeps out the salt. So we mentioned, Marion mentioned that it's much more denser than fresh water. So we want to keep that interface out. The problem now is you get geology. Why we care about geology is because it interacts with groundwater, and it has an impact as far as where is the salt water going to be coming in. And what to put in wells is very expensive, very time consuming, not the most efficient way to do things either. There is new technologies available. Some people gave us access to their property. We put a wire out. It's about 120 feet or so in area, and we can inject a current through that wire. So it'll send a signal into the earth, and we can actually measure how electrically conductive the earth is down to bedrock in some places. We did that in areas to fill in where wells are, and because of the geology, we really can't. There's another method where you can. There's a ratio of about 40 to 1. So for every foot above sea level, you have 40 feet below that of fresh water pushing out the salt. But that doesn't work on Orient because we have this clay unit. And so basically we're putting that all together to really kind of do a study here. I don't know if you wanted to.
Marion, why don't you talk a little bit about what saltwater intrusion is and what causes it?
Okay. Sure. So I put a slide up behind us here. I'm just going to go back really quick to mention something. Fred, you had talked about the given Hertzberg, like the 40 to 1. So even though you might, the fresh water above sea level, we may have 4, 5, 6 feet. So you might think you have 5 times 4,200 feet, but we're not seeing that. Again, we're seeing a maximum thickness of about 80 feet. So there's 2 ways that we think saltwater intrusion could occur here on Shelter Island. The first is the coastal areas. You can see. Oh my gosh.
No, I think Joe, you got to move over here because she's sitting too close to you.
Oh my goodness. This is really, thank you guys. I'm so sorry. I do know where I am. I didn't get on this morning. Okay. So the first is in the coastal area as we've got water generally flows downhill, right? And so higher elevation to lower elevation, that's also true in groundwater. And so we've got the higher elevations, the water is coming, the fresh water is coming down, and it's discharging to your surrounding coastal waters. Meanwhile, the salt water is surrounding you and it's coming in. So as this water level goes down, as you start, maybe there's a drought condition, maybe you start using a lot of water, this head goes down and it allows this pressure is higher to come in. So in the coastal areas, and as sea level rises, the ocean level is going to go up. We'll see that in a minute. The other one is not confined to coastal areas, and this is coming from below. We call this upconing. So the salt water that's below, if you start pumping a lot in your wells, you can pull the salt water up into your well. So that's the 2 ways that I see it really occurring in Orient.
So when you talk about pumping a lot, would be filling a swimming pool pumping a lot?
I would say, I'm gonna have to waffle a little bit, Julian, that's like site specific. It really depends on where your well is and how much water you've got, how the thickness of that water, how hard you're pumping, if, I guess you're gonna do it in the summer when there's not as much precipitation is your only source of recharge to your aquifer here, right? And so in the winter is really when things mostly recharge. In the summer months, a lot of it's lost to evapotranspiration. It's hotter, you might get less precipitation. So during those conditions, the water levels are starting to drop too. So it's site specific. I don't have a straight answer for you, sorry.
Okay.
And, you know, we're technically in a drought right now. So if you look at and that's determined by monitoring those water levels. USGS monitors almost, I guess, over 1,000 wells on Long Island on a regular basis. I'm going to get into trouble how many of them. But in general, we're monitoring how that pressure, that freshwater pressure is migrating and changing. And all of that data was somebody went out to the well and actually measured what was the depth of water, and then we can kind of calculate what the pressure is. If we look at the data for this year, we're in a significant drop as far as those water levels. And we're seeing the impacts of that. For the first time in 30 years, I got a phone call from a farmer near the coast in Great Neck, Manhasset Neck. I had mapped some of the intrusion there, and the deeper systems are impacted. And at first people are like, well, I'm pumping the same amount as my shallower well. Why is that a problem? Because of the confined aquifer. So it depends on how you're pumping. And that's where geology again comes in, to know which well, how it's being pumped, and its location is some of the variables.
So maybe we could take a look at Orient. I know you've done some mapping of the low-lying areas and the high-risk areas, Marianne.
Sure. So it kind of ties in. Did you want to go to the sea level rise projections first too? Okay. So these were simulations we did based on, as Joanne introduced, some of the sea level rise projections. I know the state has updated these since, I think, maybe last year. They're a little bit higher now. But at any rate, we're talking about, the slides we're going to show you really are from 2050s and 2100. So 2050 is like 25 years from now. 2100 I know is a long time in the future, but 2050s we're saying we're going to see about almost a 2-foot rise in sea level, and 2100 almost a 4-foot rise. And so again, if we have this same cross section, you know, from southwest to northeast, this blue line here is where we think that interface between the saltwater and the freshwater was pre-development, before any of us showed up. The yellow is current conditions, about 2020, and then by 2100, we're anticipating or simulating that the interface is going to come up quite a bit. That's the red line here. This is, oh, sorry. Let me just jump ahead for a second. So this is from a totally different source. This is from NOAA and their projections of sea level rise and coastal flooding. And I think what I wanted to show you here, this is 2050. This green area here is where they're saying the salt water is going to come up from below. So that's kind of consistent with, let's go back here. Oops. That's consistent with this sea level rise projections that we have here. So these are areas that we think are very vulnerable to saltwater intrusion, and there we go. So these areas in particular are the areas that we think over time the private wells are going to become at risk. So it's this coastal area, which is probably not a surprise to any of you guys who live down here. You probably see it maybe during summer months, might get a little bit saltier. And these areas here are where the aquifer is a little bit thinner to begin with. These here are what we believe the thickness of the freshwater aquifer is. And I guess, Andy, I'm going to put you on the spot, I'm so sorry, but you really want about 30 feet, right, of fresh water, 40? Thank you.
Private wells, the private water system standard currently requires private well to be located 40 feet from water. That's what we want. A lot
Yeah.
of contamination.
Yeah.
You know, we can't see.
Oh, okay. So here I am thinking I'm circling everything. Yeah, I know. I think that's down the south, well, you can't see my cursor. Down like the south area, right?
So
No. I'm gonna let you know.
No, it's okay. So over here, this is where you see the cluster of little white dots, and again, freshwater thickness is 0 to 10 for all those little white dots. In the red zone, which is down by the yacht club, you've got some greens, you've got some reds, and this is the area that's most vulnerable. And you can start to correct me if I'm wrong here, but this red zone and green zone is one area. Over here, where you see Narrow River Road coming up, which is what Marianne was showing, which would show future inundation, future flooding. It'll be visible. So again, some of this is coming up from the bottom. You can't see it. You can only test for it. But that area also is showing some areas of concern, and then way out at Orient Point. So hold your questions just for a few more minutes, because we'll open it up for everybody to have a time to chat and go back to some of these maps. These are the vulnerable areas. So my question, back to you. So my question is, if you're only 1 or 2 feet, 3 feet above sea level, what do you think about the fresh water beneath your feet? If it's supposed to be 40 to 1, then you're talking 80 feet, but we already know from the work that Marianne has done and the USGS has done that in some locations we don't have 80 feet of fresh water below us, especially in the village down by the bay. So what do those wells look like today, do you think?
Well, I think the best is probably to go back to the data that Andy and Jason shared in the beginning, right? So maybe like 4% of the wells that were tested recently, maybe like 8 out of 100, 200, something like that,
Right.
had salt water that exceeded chlorides. And again, like plug, you got to use the health department and get your wells tested. I mean, you can taste it to some degree. You'll start to taste it, but you don't want to wait till it's gone, till the well's gone.
Yeah. Fred, do you want to add to that in terms of the Orient, our geology?
Well, that goes to, on the one hand, the unconfined systems can be a little bit more dynamic. So if we do get a wetter year, we have enough fresh water, or if we reduce pumping, if a homeowner kind of cuts back on the pumping, if it's upconing or if there's a change in the interface, you can have a little bit of transition. But in general, especially confined or semi-confined, it's pretty much a permanent situation. So once we have intrusion, and we see that especially in Western Long Island or certain areas, if there's that's related more to public supply pumping, but where it's a higher rate, then its confined systems can be really a permanent setup. But in Orient, we're talking about shallow wells and homeowner wells, small pumping that's going on. You can, there's ways of going around. You can try to do, if we don't stress out the system locally, then that's one way to kind of try to go forward. But there's a chance, because it's unconfined, there will be a transition like that, and that's where you see the couple 100 milligram per liter chloride concentrations. It's not like it's on or off. There's a bit of a kind of a transition that goes on.
What's a shallow well?
That's local. That could be. Well, shallow well would be, I would call that you know, what we're talking about here. Everything in the upper glacial that's less than 100 feet.
Okay. Aaron, did you want to just point out the seal? Basically, we're talking about the thickness of the aquifer.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I can't
You
look
go
at
ahead
that
and
and
stand
turn my
up. Go
back
ahead,
at the same time.
Marianne, go ahead and stand up and just
All
point
right,
to the map.
thank you. Yep. Thank you for telling me that. I'll show the east in a second. I have another slide. So this was, again, 2020 average annual conditions. So these water levels are going to be a little bit higher in the winter, a little bit lower in the summer. You know, you kind of have that seasonal fluctuation. But you can see along the coast there, you know, your aquifer thickness is probably less than 25 feet. So you're really right on the edge. As you get along maybe Main Road there, you've got plenty of water. Let's just go to and at the east, again, you can see how relatively thin your aquifer is. And so you're not working with a lot of water. So you just really got to be careful. Going back to another point that Drian had made at the beginning, besides water supply, the other thing that you want to be concerned about as the sea level rises is your septic systems could start to sit in water, and then you're making a direct conduit from anything that you flush. I would be most concerned about the bacteria, about the pathogens, you know, right into the groundwater, into the surface water. So that becomes problematic too as the salt water goes up. Overall, I think we said, overall, Orient has enough water, and that was one of the points that Daniel made in the beginning, but localized areas, because of sea level rise in particular, and the potential for saltwater intrusion, local areas are really going to be impacted starting in the next couple of decades. You know, you really, as Drian said, it's kind of creeping up. It's not going to be like all of a sudden, but you're going to start to see a problem, and now's the time to start to plan for what you want to do about it.
We've talked a little, go ahead.
Just to look at the figure, just because it's labeled as aquifer thickness. The aquifer is actually thicker than that, but it's full of salt water. So, right, it's kind of really freshwater thickness. I didn't want to give anyone a false sense that the aquifer suddenly does that. It's just, we're dealing with salt water, fresh water.
Okay, so for testing and monitoring and oversight, and Joe, I'm just going to hold everything for Shelter Island too. Like, just let's, because we're gonna close in here in a couple of minutes. Fred, can you talk a little bit about testing and oversight? Like, who's responsible at the end of the day for monitoring the situation and for helping us out?
Well, I'll just talk for what at least USGS part of it would be, is that we are working with New York State DEC is funding the sustainability project. So we're actually drilling the last borehole. It's been 7 years of drilling. It's been a multi-million-dollar project to do that kind of drilling. So we'll have a whole network of deep and shallow wells. That's for monitoring. A lot of stuff out east, there was no deep wells in Orient. I think it was, over 100 years ago, there was an exploration borehole, and that's it. And it makes only sense. Economically, who's going to drill a deep well? They only need to go to what they need. But that doesn't help us if we want to do a groundwater model, if you want to do monitoring. So USGS will continue with this sustainability project going forward as a monitoring component and a modeling kind of component to it. So as new data comes in, the model will be kind of updated, but the monitoring that goes on, we mentioned it, you showed it there as far as water levels. Kind of the tried and true method is to try to sample from a screen zone. But the thing to keep in mind is a screen zone, let's say you have a 400-foot well, the screen zone is maybe 20 feet. So if that isn't placed in the perfect location, you may be completely missing what's going on, even with the interface. And we've seen that.
What is a screen zone?
A screen zone is part of, there's a casing, a pipe that's drilled into the ground to keep soil from going into the well. And then there's a screen that's perforated. It's got a number of cuts in it or a screen itself, and that's where the water enters the well as we lower that pressure in the pipe. That brings us water. So if we don't place that in an observation well in the right location, we may be missing things. So as far as chloride goes, salt water, the technology that we're applying, and we're doing this with Suffolk County Water Authority, we're doing this with Town of Riverhead, we're doing it with a lot of different entities, is we use, we'll actually send a probe. It's the same technology as when you take your cell phone and put it on a pad and charge it without plugging it in. It's by induction. So we can send a signal right through the casing and see what the formation is and determine the chloride concentration from the geophysical log. So we'll send a probe down the borehole. We go back a year from now. We'll go down, do the same borehole. I can get a complete profile of all aquifers instead of having 5 different wells at different locations and trying to sample them. So that's the monitoring that will be going on. So we can see if there's a change in that interface. And another method, it'll be, like I mentioned, the surface geophysics, where we can take monitoring of different areas because you can only have so many wells. So that's how we would monitor the saltwater interface. So it's sampling as a we want to keep it to some kind of reality. Reality would be the sample. And then the geophysics kind of fills in the gaps for us. And then the model going forward could make predictions. You need to know where the interface is to make a prediction for the future.
We talked a little bit about saltwater and whether you could reverse intrusion or not. Is there such a thing as a point of no return for saltwater intrusion? And what is that?
Well, for confined aquifers like the Lloyd Aquifer, where coastal communities are pumping from that, Long Beach, Great Neck, Manhasset Neck, Bayville somewhat used to. I can't think of anyone else now that would be, and that's Western Long Island specifically. Obviously, Suffolk County is a whole different entity. You know, we're blessed with a very thick Magathy system and an upper glacial generally that provides us with significant fresh water. It's 50 milligrams per liter chloride for a confined aquifer. And that's a tipping point. So when the supply well reaches 50 milligrams per liter chloride, based on historical data and the geophysics, the toe of the interface has already reached the supply well. So 250 is the drinking water standard, but 50, so they get kind of upset. The chloride concentration in the Lloyd is naturally about 3 milligrams per liter chloride. So 50 is it's a huge jump. The Magathy is a little bit more complicated. It's kind of in between. It's semi-confined to confined in certain places. And then we have the upper glacial. So that's what I meant. The upper glacial is a different entity. There's a flexibility. It's nothing exactly is permanent. You can control it a little bit, but again, sea level rise is kind of the elephant in the room as far as it's really going to take over certain areas in the coast. And then pumping itself, how much we pump from locally in these vulnerable areas that have been already outlined as far as in Orient. So,
Joe, do you want to tell us a little bit about the experience in Shelter Island with saltwater intrusion?
Saltwater.
And how you've monitored and tested and what you've done about it?
Sure. The aquifer system in Shelter Island is very similar to that of the Orient community. It's a similar shape, depth. It's a little bit larger of a scale. We have some segmentation of the peninsular areas of Shelter Island, like the Ram Islands or Montclair Peninsula, for those that are familiar with Shelter Island town. Those areas are isolated similar to how Orient's neighborhoods are a little bit isolated here. And we have clear segmentation of that saltwater intrusion risk. If you live near the center of the island where the aquifer is deep, just like you see here, you have about 80 feet. That's about what we have on Shelter Island as well. Not much risk for saltwater intrusion, but we have a few neighborhoods, like I mentioned, that are low-lying coastal areas that are either surrounded by salt water, creating a narrow peninsula, or they're just low-lying for larger periods of time and the lens is very, very thin. Those neighborhoods contend with saltwater intrusion primarily through upconing. Those are the two types of saltwater intrusion that we've talked about, laterally coming in from the surrounding waters or coming up from the saltwater that's below. Overwhelmingly, we're dealing with upconing issues, and those are also overwhelmingly because of pumping activity. And one action that we've taken to help mitigate this is instituting a near coastal or near shore overlay district. So it's not quite a zoning district, but it's an area that maps the lower lying, higher risk communities in the township. And there are different permitting requirements and different checks and balances involved for activities in those areas. It ranges full spectrum. There are some restrictions when it comes to new construction, about well relocation and permitting activities, and it even ties in as far as housing. There's restrictions on ADU usage in those nearshore overlay districts to help reduce impact in those more sensitive areas. With regard to drinking water supply in those districts, we take a closer look at things like well installation and well sizing. So the primary causes of upconing are your proximity to that saltwater interface and the rate with which you're extracting water. It's kind of like when you get a milkshake and it's real cold and you're sucking hard out of the straw and you can get that gap of air. That's kind of how the salt upcoating happens. If you wait for the milkshake to melt a little bit, you can get some more up through the straw. But when you have a strong well, if you're extracting really quickly from your well at 25 gallons, 50 gallons, 100 gallons per minute, you have the propensity to suck up that salt water very quickly and more aggressively. By slowing down the pump rate, 20 gallons per minute, 10 gallons, I think 5 gallons per minute is the county minimum. You're reducing the risk of sucking up salt water because you're drawing the water more slowly. The water has the opportunity to travel laterally through the sand particles rather than getting sucked up all at once. So one activity and one regulation that we've tried to put forward is having well sizes, pump rates down as low as possible. So if you're building a new house, you largely need at least 20, maybe 30, maybe even 40 gallons per minute to service the water in your house, so multiple people can take showers at once, or you're doing a load of laundry, you have enough water pressure. And so to balance that, we've said you really need to have a lower pump rate. So we'll say 5 gallons per minute is the minimum, and we'll have a storage tank put in instead. So in the basement or anywhere in the house, instead of your normal well tank, pneumatic well tank, you'd have something twice or 3 times as large, 400 gallons, so that your 5 gallon per minute well is running for longer, and you're drawing off of a smaller or larger storage tank in your basement to supplement when your demand in your house is higher. And that's been very successful in terms of helping reduce the amount of upconing. The other action that we've taken is to have homeowners review how the well was installed originally. Many of the neighborhoods that we have in these low-lying areas were cottages that were put in, decades ago with smaller houses, smaller water demands, and perhaps the attention to how the well was installed originally was not the current code or was more casual then, and the wells may just be a little bit too deep. They may be too close to that saltwater interface, and we've had a number of successful projects where the homeowner went and raised the screen area on their well, reduced the pump size, and they were areas where the homeowner perhaps every August was having chloride issues, and now after those changes, they've had success in reducing or eliminating the impact of chlorides in their drinking water. These neighborhoods that I'm talking about largely are non-conforming by many measures with respect to the county's guidelines. They don't meet separation distances because the houses are close together. They don't have that 40 feet of fresh water lens to draw from. So we're already operating in sort of a unique environment, and we're trying to be creative about what we can control to make the situation a little bit better. Just backing up 1 second in terms of monitoring, we have a network of monitoring wells that are installed by USGS across the island, and they monitor the elevation of the water in the aquifer. That's our big tool for understanding our risk for lateral saltwater intrusion. Earlier, we mentioned that you have about 3 feet of fresh water above sea level in the aquifer here. That delta is what's pushing the water in your aquifer outward. That's what's keeping the salt water on the perimeter at bay. So the more fresh water you have above sea level, the more pressure you have pushing out at the salt water along the edges. We monitor that exact same thing on Shelter Island. Our aquifer level is usually 3 to 5 feet above sea level, and we keep a close eye on how that level is changing throughout the season. As we get closer to August, September, where it's been dry, less recharge, more evapotranspiration from plant activity, our aquifer level goes down significantly. And that's how we gauge whether we need to put drought restrictions on the community or not. We look at the top elevation, and if it starts to get lower compared to averages, then we know the risk of saltwater intrusion from the perimeter is going up, and we start to implement conservation methods. The sort of the odd paradox about conservation is that, particularly on Shelter Island here as well, all of our drinking water systems are largely closed loop. When you have a well on your property and you use your water domestically, it goes into your septic system and it goes right back into the ground. So in terms of use, you're not really taking any water out of the system. It's fairly closed, and it's fairly close by. Where you're taking the water out is pretty close to where it goes back into the ground. We lose the majority of our water naturally from the water going downhill out the aquifer. That 3 or 5 foot delta that you have is flowing downhill, and it's seeping out into the saltwater surrounding area, and that's natural. We lose, I think it was in the report, millions of gallons per day from the aquifer here in Orient just seeping out naturally. So it's important to understand where the water losses are and what conservation mechanisms can be effective. On Shelter Island, the conservation methods for reducing water use are less about trying to maintain the amount of water in the aquifer. We know we won't have much impact on keeping that aquifer level high because the majority is flowing out naturally. But we know that by implementing conservation methods, we're lowering the likelihood of upconing and chloride intrusion on a local house-by-house level by keeping the water flow down, reducing the extraction rates, and looking at it sort of as a more regional issue that we're dealing with rather than trying to keep the number of gallons lower.
So you're responsible for that on Shelter Island?
Yes, the monitoring network of wells is, I think it's owned by USGS. We pay them to service it, but we receive the data, and then we use that data to make local decisions about whether we need to implement drought restrictions. We also use that data in developing policy for that nearshore overlay district, wetland permit applications, things like that.
Great. Okay, so I'd like to open it up to questions, but one last comment from each one of you about the threat of saltwater intrusion for the Orient community. How big is it? And your last thought for us, for the audience here.
No, I think it's, we're by having some monitoring wells now in the community and the work that we had outlined before as far as, from Suffolk County, as far as being diligent on the sampling, and everyone's being proactive, having a meeting like this, kind of elevating the information and getting everyone on board to, conserve the resource and stay vigilant about it. I think we're all kind of working together, and I think that's the best way going forward. Instead of, I think the problems in the past were not here on Orient, but in general, on Island, different areas, kind of ignoring the issue, hoping it's going to go away. So by being proactive, I think is
Great. Mary Ann?
I would just have to echo what Fred just said, you know, continuing to work with the USGS on monitoring your geophysics as well as wells, and Andy and Jason and everybody having their well tested, and deciding as a group how you want to move forward for the vulnerable wells, you know.
Yeah, testing and monitoring is the next best tool in the toolkit for communities like this, and what we're doing on Shelter Island, and actually what we're trying to enhance, and which would be a good takeaway for this community, is the sharing of those results, so that neighbors can understand what their neighbors are dealing with and how it might impact them, but also to help identify trends. So on Shelter Island, we have set up a repository, voluntary, where if you get a well test either privately or through the county's program, you can volunteer to submit your results. And periodically, my office or one of our water committees reviews that information. And we haven't done it yet, but it is our intent to provide, say, an annual report on the data that we've collected, make that available to them. And it's largely been welcomed. A lot of people are participating so far.
Are there any questions from the audience? Barbara. Stand up, stand up.
If Fred can give us a picture of what they found at Oyster Pond School as far as the different levels of aquifer all the way down to bedrock.
We're still analyzing. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me on this? That's fine. I can speak loud. Yeah, we're still analyzing the core, but from what I've looked at, we did compare it to a time domain, the surface measurement I talked about. The school was really nice and proactive. We use that as an educational thing. Yeah, it was significantly, we were shocked how deep it was to the interface from the geophysics from the surface. And we're like, okay, it's surface geophysics, maybe. And then when we drilled the borehole, we saw why. I mean, there's a significant ice age type of clay deposit. A lot of the area was kind of a glacial lake clay that was deposited. You can see like changes from each season in them. And that kind of dominates the borehole. There is some Cretaceous at the bottom. The Cretaceous would be like the older deposits, like the Magathy, the Lloyd, the Raritan clay. So we did encounter some of those units, but there was some portion of the Lloyd as well intact. But we're still looking at the cores and mapping it.
There was fresh water and then a thick layer of clay and then more fresh water.
No, I wish there was.
Okay.
The reality, and that goes into, well, I'm not, there was some recent drilling even offshore. There's a bunch of researchers that think that there's fresh water, this vast reserve offshore. They actually drilled this summer in Nantucket area. And we were trying to tell them, take a look at the data we see here on Long Island, and there's really no such thing. But in any event, there is the only fresh water that we're seeing, and it would be offshore. It's actually locked in the clay unit. The clays are still out of equilibrium. The sea level rise that took place like 10,000 years ago, where we had a 400-foot rise in sea level, when the glaciers all kind of melted, within like a short period of time. Geologists call a short period of time 1,000 years because we deal in billions. But when you look at it that way, that we can actually see fresh water still in the clay unit that's there, and even in the Raritan clay, so the aquifers used to be fresh. We had the sea level rise, and then that salt water really kind of intruded a lot of the North Fork and South Fork kind of deeper aquifers.
So you're saying that the aquifer, I mean, we have a model that's showing 85-foot depth. Is that clay layer, and you said it was like 40 feet down.
Right,
so
it's a
that's
little bit
less
shallower, so that'll constrain your system kind of, but you'd need other areas to determine that, and that's where if you can't afford, just to give you an idea, that's almost was over almost $250,000 just to drill the one test borehole, and that's fairly shallow here in Orient. So it gets very expensive. So if we use surface geophysics, I can spend 2-3 hours and collect data down to bedrock on how salt water, where it is. So we use that with the geology, and you can see, where the.
So is the modeling that we have in our report, is that accurate? Because it's showing 85.
No.
We don't have that claim there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
We
So
don't have
it's.
the claim.
No, a model is as good as the data that's available. When that model was put together, that was the data that was available. Technically, what I'm telling you hasn't been published yet. We're in final technical review now, hopefully, and that will be distributed. And then the data and some of the model and other data like that will be shared, and it'll be utilized by consultants and other professionals to kind of go forward.
So we have to.
Well, that's science.
We have to hire Marianne to do another model.
Yeah, but that's how science progresses, right? We get new data and then we
You guys are
update.
modeling. The USGS is modeling it, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, site-specific models, but
Oh,
there's definitely.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Go ahead, Sandra.
And you can tell me that that if we have enough water for now, but if we have a drought and seawater is rising, I've seen some of the FEMA pictures. Actually, where I live, which happens to be a little hillier area overlooking the Island Sound, seems to become an island over time. So it seems to me, what kind of measures can we start to take now so we get ahead of the problem?
Marianne, and then Joe, you talked a little bit about policy, but Marianne, what are your thoughts about what we can do?
My thoughts are pay attention to the next panel.
This is meant to be a transition.
Explored in more detail. Yeah. I mean, really, that's the reality. Sea level rise and flooding is going to be probably a more urgent problem, a more immediate problem. Water supply is going to be just one piece of it.
Right. Go ahead.
I have a question, which is on Shelter Island, the limiting pumping, doing the stuff with the wells, that's now only voluntary, correct? Or are there actual laws in place that mandate that?
I'll just talk about it.
Because my question is, we could do things that make us maybe behave in ways that we don't want to do, but that will be good long-term for the community. But we need our township to enforce that.
Yes. So the answer really is it depends. There are policies that have been put in place that force reviews of activities that were informally reviewed, but there are no set regulations or laws about what pump rate you can use for your particular application. Those are decisions that are a product of the review processes that were put in place. So I think how I would describe it is that the town has recognized where some of the high-risk problems were, and they've identified that those need to be reviewed with a little bit more scrutiny, and the outcomes of some of those reviews are for changes, technical changes about well locations, pump rates, things like that, but it's forcing the conversation and helping those applicants who are often unaware of the challenges that they might face on a particular site, address them before they can become.
Sure. So I'm actually thinking of your point before about water conservation. And so growing up in the UK, it was very common because of the water pressure there, also an island. We would all have a water storage tank in the attic. So if we're reducing flow rate and we have water storage, pardon me, would be one solution. So if homes did have a well, they could also be required to have water storage. And then if this is in two parts, currently, while we're designing and planning homes, we have to have leaders from any water that happens to rain on roof, go down through the drain pipe and then into a dry well. Having dry wells, if that was to be stored for use for irrigation and stuff for, for maintaining a property's lawns and things like that. Is there an impact on the aquifer if we store that water distinct from being in a dry well and it going back into the aquifer?
Well, there are a couple questions there, so I'll try to take it from the top. In Shelter Island, we don't allow rainwater capture. It's something that we're actually looking to change. The thinking many years back was that they wanted all of that water as much as possible to go into the ground to recharge. And they perhaps took it a little too far. In practice, it would be very handy if folks had a rain barrel to use for their garden. It's much better to store a few gallons of water to water your tomatoes than to have to pump it back out of the ground. At a small scale like that, there's no measurable impact to meaningful recharge or hydrodynamics. When it gets into storing water for domestic use, speaking as an engineer, I think that makes a lot of sense. But I have to caution that there are many other public health related issues about storing water in a barrel and the potential for bacteria and meeting other sanitary codes. So in concept, it's a strategy that's used in many other places, like you pointed out, that are water constrained. It's one that might make sense for this community. Certainly, the easiest place to start is on a garden level type rain capture system. I don't recall what the other points of your question were. Sorry.
Yeah, about this. So another thought you talked about back, if we store the water, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. So just taking the UK, for years they've had water storage tanks in their attics. You mentioned, I think, in a basement. If you can also look at like Bermuda, an island that only has rainwater capture, how do they address the bacteria and everything else in now? That's their 100% of their water. My idea was just to kind of divide the drinking water from rainwater capture, which would go for irrigation, from the other ones. So I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel here. I think there's data that already exists.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. There are many communities that are implementing policies like that. I can't speak to the sanitary codes and how they address that. The technology certainly exists, but I don't know what that would entail. That's actually a good question, probably for Jason from the previous panel. I won't put him on the spot with that, but in concept, yes, water storage is a big part of that solution.
All right. Well, I think that's it for this panel. So thank you very much, Fred, Marianne, and Joe.
All right, we're going to get started.
I'm just here to help.
As most of you know, the Suffolk County Water Authority announced in the past year, that's right, that they were, as part of their much larger Pine Barrens program, they were considering a possible pipeline from Up Island across the causeway and into Orient. And so that's an interesting topic for all of us here, particularly given everything that we've heard today so far. So we wanted to explore in this panel the pros and cons of public water. And we'll hold questions to the end. I know people are going to have questions, but we'll hold them till the end. And luckily, we have an excellent panel of the right people here to chat about this topic. Bob DeLuca is here. He is the CEO of the Group for the East End and has been there since 1992. True story? Yeah, true story. Bob has a BS and MS in environmental engineering, environmental science, and is focused at the Group for the East End on zoning and on wildlife conservation, on water restoration, and on environmental education. Very, very happy to have Bob with us. Bob was also instrumental in the beginning of the water report and helping us through the whole process. Has been a great guide and mentor to us. We also have Joe Fenora. Again, thank you. Double panelist for us. Already introduced, engineer for the town of Shelter Island, an oyster farmer as well. I think we failed to mention that, right? and a engineer diver, right? Retired engineer diver. Joe Pokorny has joined us. Thank you, Joe, for being here. Joe is the Deputy CEO for Operations at the SCWA, the Suffolk County Water Authority. It's your 30th year there, is that right?
Thank you very much. Yes.
30 years there. Started in 1995. You've held a wide variety of positions there, including, importantly for our discussion now, the Director of Distribution, which means that for a long time you were in charge of all of the pipelines. And so that's a important background for our discussion today. Also a New York State licensed engineer. And then finally, Al Krupski, I think everybody knows Al, but for those who don't, he's our town supervisor. For 20 years, he was a town trustee. And for 14 of those was the trustee president. Also on the town board, 2005 through 13. And then Suffolk County legislator for 10 years, 13 through 23, and then was first elected to town supervisor in 23. So thank you so much, Al, for being here. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So I thought maybe we would start out with a little bit of history. This isn't the first time that a pipeline's been proposed for Orient. And Bob was involved in I don't know if I call it the resistance, but the discussion at the time of the pipeline back then. And I thought maybe Bob could just tell us the story of that project, about the proposed pipeline, the community's response, and just give us a little bit of context.
Great, thanks, Daniel. And first, thanks to all of you for the endurance of staying through this. And also to the Orient Association, just for all of the incredible work that's been done around this project. You know, I've been doing this stuff for close to 40 years, and I don't know that there's a more focused, organized, and efficient community organization that we work with. So hats off to you guys for all the work that you've done here. And I know most of you were in grammar school 15 years ago or so, so I'll tell the story about the last pipeline proposal. And, you know, after the 2008 recession, federal monies were made available to do infrastructure projects in various places. And Joe will check me on any of this if I get it wrong. But the Water Authority had applied for and received support for a pipeline proposal that would essentially connect up its East Marion distribution area, specifically to Browns Hills, in which many of you may or may not know. Browns Hills is a small community well field. It's had its problems at that time. The Water Authority had taken it over, and people were using undersink filters at the time. And from the Water Authority standpoint, bringing the pipe to Browns Hills was something, one, they could find funding for, and two, would make life probably easier than all of the different things that you've heard about some of that. At the same time, the town of Southold was just beginning its comprehensive planning effort, which it had been gearing up for a long time. And that comprehensive planning effort deals with the future land use and what's going to happen out here, as many of you know, and again, you guys have been involved in. And so I think the dynamic tension that existed was, in this business, as long as I've been at it, the most challenging thing in environmental management is unintended consequences. So the community's concern, which we shared, was that if you kind of just ran a pipe someplace to solve one problem, everything that we just did here at that time wasn't known. And what would be the consequences of that over time? And the concern is what's called growth inducement. So growth inducement really is something where infrastructure, whether it's roads, whether it's electricity, whether it's sewer and water, has a tendency to, if you want to, you can do more with property than you might otherwise do. So even back when I worked back in the day at the health department, you know, there are very good things about public water and infrastructure, and there are challenges. And the challenge usually comes in the case of something like the Water Authority, where the Water Authority has a job which is to deliver you clean, tested water, and they do a great job of that, okay? The community, the local community, has planning, zoning, and land use control. And those two don't necessarily jibe with each other. And at the time, the supervisor, Scott Russell, was very concerned about what the consequences might be. And here's the kind of thing that can happen. I'm not saying it did or would, but what can happen is once you have access to lots of public water, you then think to yourself, you know what, this piece of property might be more available for another type of use, which it's not zoned for now. So let me go and try my hand at the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Planning Board and see what I can get. And as land values rise, speculation increases. And if I spent a good part of my career working only on the South Fork, and I can tell you in earnest, it's a problem. Speculation drives the pressure for more expansive development. That drive for expansive development, if approved, can lead to more water consumption. And so if we look at Orient today, and you figure there's about 250 lots or so that can be built right now, nothing else changing, that's about 30 million gallons of water a year. And that's not including irrigation, which the Water Authority has told me about 75% of their consumption in the summertime is irrigation. So maybe it's 60 million gallons, which there's enough water, but making the problem worse and exacerbating that in the face of sea level rise are the unintended consequences. So the concern at the time was the town wasn't ready to consider that proposal because it hadn't done the planning necessary. And one of the things that the Water Authority, and we were talking back and forth, said, look, you guys figure out what you want to do in Orient. You got a better plan? And the Orient Association set about doing all of this work to try to get to that better plan. So from my standpoint, this is how these types of things need to start, this type of discussion, this type of dialogue, people understanding what's going on. And long term, the real challenge here is if you were to go with public water, and there are other alternatives we can talk about, you really need to think about how you keep a lid on what the potential is in a beautiful resort community like Orient, where lots of folks would like to do lots of things. And a lot of my job involves trying to balance the rights of individuals with the broader concern of the community. And it's my hope that communities can find the resources they need, the infrastructure they need, without sabotaging the community character that most people came there for.
Thank you.
I'll leave it there.
Well said. Well said. Thank you. Let's see, Joe Fenora, I thought just because Shelter Island has had experience more recently with a failed water system and asking the Water Authority to help with it. I think in West Neck, is that correct? I thought maybe that story also might be helpful for the people here to hear.
How much time do you have? No, it's not that long a story. It's a good one, actually. It's a story about community need and adapting to their changing needs. The West Neck water system is owned by the town of Shelter Island. It has a uniquely appropriate history in that there were a group of homes who had trouble installing their own wells over ranging back from the 60s and the 70s and into the 80s. But they just simply had poor geology there. There were a number of clay layers and rock formations, and the folks could not successfully put in wells. And in that little neighborhood lived a plumber. His name was Bill Payne. And Bill Payne had a good well on his property. And as a side business, or at least a hobby in the beginning, he started connecting his neighbors to his well, and he started selling them water. This became a small water system. He expanded his business selling water for a few decades until he wanted to retire in the 90s. At that time, I think the health department was probably starting to ratchet up their insistence on regulations of bringing this up to speed, and he couldn't handle it anymore. He was nearing retirement and was not interested in making these changes. So he handed it over to the town and said, congratulations, town, you can have this for free. You now have a water system. And the town had the burden of meeting these newly imposed regulations, or at least bringing it up to code. And for the most part, they were very successful at running their own small water system, which doesn't include town facilities. It's exclusively residential properties and a few small commercial properties. So they did this for, over 20 years, up until a few years ago. And the problem that they ultimately ran into was that it was becoming very difficult to find the people to operate the system. A water system requires licensed operators. It requires skilled personnel to conduct tests, to meet the current regulations for equipment installation and monitoring. And the gentleman that had been running it is the name John Hallman. He had a water testing business. He was a local plumber, and he was sort of a jack of all trades. And he did this for almost 2 decades. Similar to Bill Payne, John was ready to retire, and in looking for a new water operator, there were none to be had. The water operator has to be on Shelter Island twice per day, at least, to operate the system. And not only did we not have any licensed folks available, but we couldn't compel folks from off island to want to take this job. certainly not at the price that John Hallman was willing to do it for. So John did a great job. Bill Payne did a great job at keeping the lights on, but the town found itself in a place that they could not backfill this care and management that had been done by islanders for so long. It's a story that I understand is pretty similar with other small water systems across Long Island, where townships just lack the expertise and often the ability to capital plan and meet current regulations for a water system. So because of our inability to find a suitable operator and at a reasonable cost, the town reached out to Suffolk Water Authority to fill in as a managerial role. So they are under contract now with the town, as they are with the Village of Deering Harbor, to operate their system. The official structure is that the town still owns the infrastructure. That means the physical equipment. But every day, a Suffolk Water employee travels there to make sure that the lights stay on, that we're meeting all of our compliance requirements. They handle the operation from soup to nuts. They keep the water running, they do the billing, and the town has a contracted price with them for those services. Largely, that's been very successful. The partnership has allowed us to make improvements to the system that the town otherwise could not have afforded to do. Suffolk Water provided us with financing and expertise that effectively came at no cost to the town, and we still maintain the ability to make key decisions about the system because the town is the owner. So in terms of adding new customers or changing rate structures, all of those decisions are made very much on the local level, exclusively on the local level. Still, the best way that I describe it is Suffolk Water now is sort of the new John Hallman or the new Bill Payne, and they come with a lot of other people besides just that one guy.
Great, that's super helpful. Yeah. Thank you, very, very well.
So, no, it's since expanded to a series of wells from then, not related to Bill Payne or Suffolk Water, but I think we have four wells in total, one on backup, but that's the no. All of Shelter Island's water is from Shelter Island. There's no ability to get it on or off the island. The water system, West Neck Water, derives all of its water from the groundwater on Shelter Island. And in general, the breakup on Shelter Island is about 90-10. 90% of the parcels are served by individual wells. 10% of the parcels are served by a community water system. And there's only 3 community water systems. One that we just described, that's West Neck Water, that's owned by the town. The Village of Deering Harbor, which is a separate government entity, but physically on Shelter Island, they have a small water system that services their small village. That's also operated by the Water Authority, but owned by the village. And then there's the Shelter Island Heights Homeowners Association, which is not actually a government. It's just a homeowners association within the jurisdiction of the town. They have a small system, but it's actually privately owned. So they have a wastewater plant. They also have a water system. They operate both of those, and you participate in them if you're in the homeowners association. There's no affiliation with the town on either the wastewater or the drinking water. So 3 total systems, and combined, they service, like I said, about 10% of the parcels on the island.
Thanks, Gene. Good question. Let's see. So, Joe Picorni, we have a lot of questions for you. Thank you. I think you brought a couple of slides, just kind of background about this, and maybe it'd be helpful. I have a beginning question, though, which is that in the flyer that I was handed about the pipeline, it said that, let me see here, it said SCWA is not planning to extend a water main to Orient. And so that was confusing to me. So I imagine you'll address that.
Sure. So Dan, I'll touch on that.
Great.
Let me go through this, and that'll be one of the things that a question that I hopefully will answer. So good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for coming. It's a pleasure to be here to speak with you. I want to, and I'm not being patronizing, I really want to commend you folks that you are as engaged and you are as interested in the water and the aquifer and the place that you live as you are. Because when you go back, and when I say go back, go west, people are not as engaged. They're not as knowledgeable about what's going on underneath their feet. They're concerned about their drinking water, no question about that. But the level of detail that you folks have here it's really admirable. So it's great. So I'm going to just give you a little PowerPoint presentation, and I apologize if I'm going to tell you some things that you know, but I just want to dispel some of the rumors because I see some of the questions that I get and some of the articles I read in the newspaper about the Water Authority. I just want to just quickly tell you what the Water Authority is. So, you know, the Water Authority, I mean, you know that we serve most of Suffolk County. We're one of the largest, if not the largest, groundwater supplier in the country. All right, and we've been in business for about 75 years doing that. We're a New York State authority, right? We're a nonprofit organization. A lot of people say, oh, those guys are all, you know, wealthy paid, you know, executives and they're walking away with stock bonuses. We're not a private company. We're a nonprofit New York State public authority. Any money that we make and the business that we do, we put that back into the organization. We put that back into this business, which is a very capital intensive business. I think we heard the USGS, Ron said something about the cost of a test boring being $250,000. We do test borings all the time. And we drill new wells all the time. We put miles and miles, we put probably 30 miles of pipeline in the ground every year. We have a capital budget of over $100 million a year. So every year we're investing another $100 million into the system. We have almost $800 million in outstanding debt. Not that that's a great thing, but that just gives you an idea of what it takes to build a water system the size of the Suffolk County Water Authority. We serve about 85% of the population of Suffolk County, which is about 1.2 million people. There's some areas that we don't serve that you're probably aware of, like the Riverhead Water District. Hampton Bays has a water district of their own. In Western Suffolk, in Huntington, there are 3 water districts there, the South Huntington, the Green Lawn, and the Dix Hills water districts. Those are run by the local towns. So we have relationships with them, but we're separated. There are closed valves between our systems. We're not a branch of Suffolk County government. So we have that in our name, but we're not any part of Suffolk County government. And we don't enforce drinking water. We don't enforce drinking water standards. We don't create drinking water standards. We follow them. And we have to follow them by law. So we can't just casually exceed drinking water standards or provide drinking water that is over the standard. If we do, Jason and Andy will tell you, we're breaking the law. And if we do that, we have to tell you about that. We never really have to do that. But if we did, it would be a violation, and we would have to let all of our customers know about that. So that just gives you an idea of where we are, okay? This gives you a little bit of an idea of the service territory that we cover. And again, it goes from the county line over by Amityville, all the way out to the forks here. On the South Fork, we serve all the way out to Montauk and all of Montauk. The unique thing that I want to point out here is that if you look at the Southold system, you can see that gray area, that's the Riverhead Water District. And there is a gap between the Southold water system and the rest of our water system. So the rest of our water system is fairly contiguous, but there is no connection between Southold and the rest of our water system. And the nice thing about a water system that's interconnected is that there's inherent redundancy and reliability in something like that. Because if you see all those little dots on this map, those are all well fields. We operate 250 different well fields throughout the county. And on those 250 well fields, there are over 600 wells. And so managing that infrastructure is a huge task. But that interconnectivity and that fact that you have that many well fields means that something can fail in the middle of the night and something else will respond and something will fill in the gap, so to speak. So that is a great thing. Having an interconnected water system provides a great deal of reliability and redundancy. So I want to update you on the North Fork pipeline. I know that this is a big issue. The supervisor is well aware of it, and we've had a number of meetings and whatnot about it. I don't want to get into a big debate about the North Fork pipeline. I just want to bring you up to speed on where we stand with this. years, okay? So the pipeline that we're proposing, it's about 8.5 miles, and it would bring water from the Flanders area. And I say the Flanders area only because that's where the connection would be made. The water would come from the whole area that is the Mauritius, Southampton. That's all one big pressure zone. And there are many, many wells in that pressure zone that are all interconnected. And that was, so the one connection point, because you've got to connect somewhere, is in Flanders. And we have a pipeline that runs on Route 24, and it actually has a connection point that we put in there many, many years ago, because we've been talking about this pipeline for a long, long time. I've been with the Water Authority for 30 years, and shortly after I started with the Water Authority, we took over the Greenport water system. And we've been working on the Greenport water system ever since I've been here, improving it, and adding wells as we could in the town of Southold, which has always been a challenge. And all the things that you've been talking about today, we have been living with for all that time. So the concern about saltwater intrusion, the concern about nitrates, these are all things that we've been dealing with forever. And in Southold, you know, it may be a little less challenging than in Orient, but it's equally challenging. It really is very, very challenging in Southold, because these issues that you talk about with saltwater intrusion, and as Joe talked about, pumping water, we've had to be cognizant of that forever. We've got 60 wells that serve the Southold area, and we have chloride problems in those wells. And if we pump them too hard and for too long, and typically at the end of the season, when I say the season, I mean the summertime when we pump wells hard, the chlorides have all gone up in those wells. And some of those wells in Southold are at the point where we need to shut them down. Because what can happen is if you shut them down and let them rest, they will recover, but it takes a while. But we've been, like I said, we've been living with that. We serve Montauk. Montauk is even worse. Montauk is a very, very similar situation. A lot of small wells. And as a water supplier, we have the ability, one good thing is that we can rotate the production of the well. So we can run a well that's on the north side of the peninsula for a day or so, and then run a well on the south side. And we can do that, and that mitigates the impact to the aquifer. But this is something as a water supplier, you constantly, when I say constantly, this is something that we're always looking at. We have our own laboratory. We have the largest groundwater laboratory in the country, right? We have 40 or 50 chemists in that laboratory that are constantly analyzing the water quality and feeding back that information to our operations people. Because in a place like Montauk or even in Southold, we look at that water quality and then we modulate the pumpage of the wells to respond to that. And chlorides is something we can do a chloride test real quickly and determine what's going on, and everything is trended. So we're looking at trends of water quality in wells and responding to that. So it's not just, you know, we don't just turn it on and then go home. This is a very, very big operation based on wells. So bringing water to Southold is something we've talked about for a long time. And it's gotten to the point in Southold where we can't connect many more customers in Southold. And there's still another 3,000 homes in Southold that are on private wells. And we constantly get inquiries from people that they would like to get off of their private well and they would like to connect to the public water system. Very, very common. The new service department is under my jurisdiction at the Water Authority, and I hear from them all the time. And I'm going to explain to you how water gets extended to people, but the financial aspect of things is one of the reasons why people don't get public water in the area of Southold. This pipeline that we put in, this is considered a system improvement. So the pipeline, the cost of this pipeline comes out of our capital budget. And the reason why it's considered a system improvement is because it improves what's going on already for customers that are already being served. So when we do system improvements at the Water Authority, everybody pays for that. The entire water, our 400,000 customers pay for that system improvement. So, you know, if we have to add new wells, or even when we add treatment, so we all know about PFAS, and the Water Authority is adding filtration systems all over the island to remove PFAS. That's all being shared by all the customers of the Water Authority. The cost of that goes into our rate base. So there's no specific area where these folks are being charged more because they have 1,4-dioxane in their water. And in Southold, we're not going to charge more to the people in Southold because we put in a pipeline. The attitude is we're all in this together. 400,000 customers are going to have all kinds of different needs over the course of a lifetime. And while we may be replacing pipe in the South Shore, western end of Amityville, where we have a lot of old cast iron pipe that needs to be replaced, that doesn't mean that they pay more. Everybody pays the same rate, okay? And again, the main function of this pipeline is going to bring new water into Southold, and it's going to interconnect the system, so it's going to improve reliability by doing that. The benefits of something like this pipeline, bringing this in is going to allow us to take a number of our wells out of service, to let them, give them time to recover. Maybe some of these wells will be left out of service permanently, but a lot of wells will just be able to let them relax and restore themselves. We don't want to remove all the wells in Southold. We want to have local supply in Southold because that's very important from a reliability standpoint. We want to be able to produce some water in Southold, but those wells that are marginal, those wells that are having trouble with chloride intrusion, we're going to let them relax. We're going to be bringing in water from outside the hydrogeological cycle. So Southold, as Joe had said, people consume water, it goes right back into their cesspools and it goes back into, recharges into the ground. So that's kind of consistent. We're pumping water out of the ground. We're distributing it out through our distribution system. People are using the water, it gets recharged back into the ground. When we bring in additional water from outside that cycle, it almost looks like, hydrologically speaking, like additional rain, right? Because this water comes from outside. So this represents more recharge to the Southold aquifer. Well, that's a good thing, right? Because more fresh water, if it was in the form of rain or the form of outside water, that's going to increase the amount of fresh water that's in the Southold aquifer. So that will actually help to restore the aquifer. Everybody understand that? Very, very important. And, you know, we have a lot of competing uses for water in Southold. There are a lot of farmers that use water on Southold, as you know. And there are a lot of people with private wells. So this is going to benefit them by having this additional water. It's going to benefit us also because our wells that we've shut down, or even our production wells, they're all going to see a little bit more fresh water. And this is over time. It's not going to happen overnight, but this is all, the trend would be then in the positive direction because we're bringing additional water in. Again, also by bringing water in from the outside, we're going to be pumping less from the aquifer. So it's kind of a twofold benefit, bringing water from the outside and not pumping water from within the Southold system. And the other real benefit, and this is something that keeps me up late at night very often, is fire safety. So if you look at our storage tanks, and you know the most visible one is on Moores Lane in Greenport, in the summertime, in the middle of July and August, when people are using the most water, very often when I come in the morning, the first thing that I do is I take a look at what the level in that storage tank is. And I can do that on my computer. I can do it from home and look and see what's going on. But that tank in the morning will be down in the single digits. It'll be very, very low. And what that means is that that water, which is there for an emergency, basically, there's not a lot of water in that tank. So if there was a big emergency, like a big fire, it's very feasible that all of that water could be depleted and not available for fighting a fire. And you all heard what happened in Los Angeles when they had fires there and they didn't have enough water to fight a fire. That's a big deal. And that's something that's real. One of the bases for a public water system is to be able to use it for emergency purposes. So fire safety is very, very important. Where do we stand in the process now? So what we've done initially is we've had scoping sessions. And we've explained what the project is to the various people, the various involved parties. We've held 3 scoping sessions, and we're now taking all the comments that we received from those scoping sessions, and the public comment period closed in August. We received over 100 comments. Now we're going to take all of those comments and put them into a scoping document and publish that. And then shortly thereafter, probably towards the end of the year here, we're going to issue a draft environmental impact statement. And then we're going to have more hearings, because in that draft environmental impact statement, we're going to basically propose how this is going to be done, and we're going to give the public more opportunity to comment on that. We're going to take all of those comments, and those are going to be folded into a final environmental impact statement. And this is the process. This is the secret process. This is what you're required to do when you undertake a major project like this. So that's where we stand with the pipeline. Okay, so public water in Orient, and let's just take a look and see. So you've heard about this this extra phase of the pipeline project. And a lot of people say, well, you know, why are you talking about this? You're going to bring water to Orient. And that's not our intention. We don't have any immediate plans of bringing water to Orient, but we live in a world and we live in a county where we've seen this story play out. And the story that I'm talking about is what Jason and Andy spoke about, and that is contamination. Orient is not alone in detecting PFAS. I'm sure you realize that. There have been a lot of other areas in Suffolk County where there is PFAS contamination. And these areas are referred to by the health department as survey areas. And the Water Authority has worked with the health department and many, many other locations, probably a half a dozen other locations and communities in Suffolk County where there were detections of PFAS, and the residents there wanted to be connected to public water. They were on private wells, and there's still plenty of places in Suffolk County. I think there, what's the number, 20,000 public wells still left in Suffolk County? Probably something like that. So there's still plenty of areas where people are using private wells. And a lot of these survey areas had people with private wells, and they wanted public water, and they wanted it now. They wanted it as fast as possible. So the question was, how fast can you do it? And the Water Authority, in the beginning of all of this, we said, well, we'll tell you how fast we can do it. We can do it real fast. We can put pipe in the ground fast, but someone has to pay for it. And that's when you get the deer in the headlights look. You're like, how are we going to pay for this? And some of these projects are very, very expensive. And so coincidentally, with a lot of this, this contamination that showed up, we had some programs. We had COVID, and there was a lot of money made available through the American Rescue Plan. And there was a big bill that was passed by the Biden administration, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And then the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation made a lot of money available through the WIA grant program. And a lot of that money was available to supply water that were in affected survey areas. So the Water Authority, through countless meetings and conversations with the county health department, with communities, with our political leaders, one by one went through these areas and was able to provide drinking water to these areas. And most of them, if not all of them, have been done at no cost to the homeowners. So we've gone into certain areas and then we've applied for grants and gotten the money to pay for these. So when we see what's going on here in Orient, it looks like the same story. This is a survey area. People have astronomically, I'll say astronomically, because compared to other areas that we've looked at, the levels of contamination here are off the charts. And so this survey area looks to us like we've seen before. Now, we see this. We're in the process of doing SECRA for a pipeline that we're going to put in. If we didn't include Orient as part of that SECRA analysis, somebody would say to us, or many people would say to us, you're segmenting the project. You're not revealing everything that you plan to do or that could be done. And you're not being transparent. So the Water Authority, its board, and my chairman and my CEO said, no, we're going to include this survey area because we think there's the possibility that we're going to be asked to go in here and supply water to these folks that need clean drinking water. So we added it to that. So that's the reason why it's in the SECRA document. That's the reason why we're including it and we're talking about it. But right now, when I say we have no plans, we have no plans. And the reason why, we don't have any source of money for this. So this would have to be paid for by the residents or someone else in order for it to happen. And we don't have any of that lined up at this point. And I don't know that we have the desire to do that. You know, I mean, we can't force this on you. We're going to do this if the community wants it. So all of that has to come together before we would do that. So anyway, that's the reason why it's in there. I just want to show you some of the other areas that we've done, and I just want to compare what's going on. So there are water main extensions that we do, and in the normal course of events at the Water Authority, if there's a neighborhood where people are all on private wells and they want to hook up to the Water Authority, they approach our new service department. Usually we'll get phone calls from people when their well fails. Usually when someone's well fails, that's when we hear from them, because they call a well driller and they find out it's $10,000 to put a new well in, and they say, you know what, maybe I want to go on public water. Let me see what it will cost. So we get a call like that, and when we get a call like that, our new service department will go out and they'll canvass the neighbors around that home to see if there's any other interest in people connecting up. And lo and behold, very often, you go on the block and there's one person and there are 3 other people that want to hook up. And so we have a process in our rules and regulations by which, if we can get 40% of the people on a street that want to hook up, we will then, and they're going to have to pay for that. We take the cost of the pipeline on that street and we divide it by the number of houses. So let's say there are 10 houses on a street. We'll take the cost of that divided by 10. That'll be what's called the surcharge. And if 4 of the people on the street want to hook up, we'll run the pipeline at our cost, and the 4 people will pay us their portion of it, and the pipeline will run past all those 10 houses, but we're only going to hook up the 4 people that paid. So they will pay, they'll be hooked up, and they'll get water. But the process, remember, is that somebody paid for that. The Water Authority doesn't just go and put water main in the street and then say, who wants to hook up? We can't afford to do that. It's a very, very expensive process. So we only hook up people that want to hook up and want to pay, okay? So that's all part of our normal operation. That's how we do it. We have another feature of our rules and regulations that says if you are contaminated, if your area is contaminated, we drop that percentage down from 40% to 25%, okay? And what that does is our Water Authority Board did that so that if somebody's contaminated and they really want to hook up, they're not going to be constrained because not all the other neighbors want to hook up. So think about what this is. What the Water Authority is doing is here, the Water Authority is shouldering 75% of the cost of the water main installation so that 25% of the people can hook up. And we have places where we put water main in down the street where only half the people have hooked up, and 20 years later, it's still half the people. There's still people on private wells that have water main in front of their homes, but they've never hooked up. And that's fine with us. You know, we've done things per our rules and regulations, but that's how this system works. Again, we're not forcing anybody to hook up. We're not requiring anybody to hook up. It's completely elective. Sure. Uh-huh. Sure. So Wayne Scott was about 500 homes in East Hampton, south of the airport, south of the industrial area there. And in Wayne Scott, that was accepted to be a polluter. That was the source of the pollution. And the Water Authority went into that whole area where there were all private wells, and we got a grant to, I'm sorry, we didn't get a grant. The town, actually, we did get a grant, but the town actually paid for it. The town received the money, the balance of the money for the grant. But that was all paid for by the town, basically. No, we didn't pay anything. Yeah, it was a while ago, so you may misremember, but that was all paid for by the town. And we worked with the town to obtain a grant because the Water Authority will apply for and get grants. We do that all the time. And in that case, we got a grant and the grant money went back to the town. But the town eventually basically paid for us to do what we did. And so speaking of grants, these are extensions. Again, so there's a challenge here. Now, in that case, there was a polluter. And in the case of Orient, there is something going on. There's a polluter of some kind somewhere. So the water authority is not going to pay for that in any way. And the residents could pay for it if they wanted to. But if there was a polluter or some third party to pay for it, that could be paid for by it. And under our rules and regulations, when a third party pays for it, the third party pays for everything. So we don't use that 25% or 40% rule. The polluter or the third party pays for everything. So in the case of that slide with the Orient area there, that entire cost of that would be paid for by grants or by a polluter. Obviously, there's no polluter here. So we would say, let's look for grants to try to get that entire thing paid for.
So I have a couple of Orient-specific questions. I don't know if you have anything else.
You know what? I'll be done in a second.
Okay.
So look, again, there have been multiple places where we've done this. We've done this in Manorville, in Riverhead, on the Riverhead town side, and on the Brookhaven town side. We're just finishing up a job just north of Nugent Road in Riverhead. That's called South River Road. And there are hundreds of people that have been hooked up under this program, and nobody has paid for anything. It's all been paid for by grants. And on some of these projects, it's been a combination of BIL money, ARPA money, WIA money through the Environmental Facilities Corporation. The Water Authority has spent countless hours putting together the grants so that these projects could go forward, so that people could get drinking water and not have to pay for it. And if you see here on the slide, since 2018, we've been awarded $28 million for this particular purpose. And these are just some of the areas. I'm sorry, this is, these are some of the recent projects that we've worked on here. This is Riverhead. And if you take a look at a project like the one at Riverhead here, this is the Manorville area. And the cost of this was $10.85 million to connect 64 homes. And if you take a look and see where we got the money from, $3.5 million came from congressional directed spending. These are the old earmarks. So the local congressman, I think this was Lee Zeldin at the time, got us $3.5 million in congressional money. 3.85 came from BIL, 1.3 came from ARPA, and then there was a credit here from the Water Authority we used, again, in our rules and regulations. We have a 75-foot allowance. I'm not going to get into the details, but we provided a 75-foot allowance, which we do for everybody when we hook up people it's like seed money. It's again, it's in our rules and regulations. This project in South River Road, this is what we're working on right now. Again, $5 million from congressionally directed spending, 1.85 from BIL. You get the idea. You have to put all these things together. I mean, it takes time to apply for grants and to get them approved. It can take years. You know, the construction is easy. The construction we can finish in months, but the obtaining of the money for the grants takes an awful lot of time. So that's pretty much basically it.
Super, thank you. That's very, very helpful. A couple of questions I think maybe we all have, and we'll get to questions at the end, just a moment. One of the things is that you've said, and also the flyer said, was that any movement forward with this pipeline out to Orient would require input from local residents. What form is that input in? Who takes it, and what does that mean?
So it's kind of weird here, right? Because I said that in these other locations, people are clamoring for drinking water. They want safe drinking water, and they don't have the concerns that you folks have. So this issue about development seems to be a big issue, right? And I understand that. The Water Authority totally understands that. So in a case like this, I would say, well, if there's a forum like this and everybody stands up and says, hey, we want drinking water, and after the meeting, you came back to us and said, look, I really think that this is something that would go. And if Al said to us, hey, I really want to see this happen, you know, we would get to say, all right, you know what, well, let's apply for a grant. Let's see what we can get. Because again, we can't do anything unless there's the money is there.
Great.
So we would have to know and have a warm feeling that this is something that everybody wants to do. I would hear from the health department, and I know what the health department's answer would be. It would be hook them up as fast as you can.
We've identified this area as a priority for public water, similar to many other areas.
Right.
My other Orient-specific question is, do you have the map of the pipeline as proposed? One of the things we talked about earlier today is that many of the houses in Orient, particularly near the shore, are concerned about salt intrusion. But there's or do you have the chart of the?
You mean the overall pipeline?
No, just of the pipeline out in Orient. This slide.
I had it.
So there's a little bit of a disconnect between this design and the houses that it looks like are going to really need public water or some kind of fresh water because of salt intrusion. They're further out toward the point, or they're close to the shore. And this, as designed right now, is focused really on the village itself. Am I reading that right?
So this map here and what we're talking about is really PFAS related.
I see.
Right? That's the survey area.
I see. Okay, that's helpful.
So I mean, by extension, you know, suppose we were able to get this installed here and paid for with a grant. Now there's water main here. If people wanted water main because they have saltwater intrusion, maybe there's somebody further south of here or whatnot, then the water main extension process would be probably the way that it would be extended to those folks.
I see.
Right? The one that I described earlier.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. Supervisor Krupski, I thought I might ask you a question about the town. In particular, as we've talked about, a major concern among some Orient residents is about public water is that over time it will lead to significant increase in housing and commercial density. And others believe that the town zoning rules are sufficient to restrain development. And how should we think about that over time from your perspective?
That's a very good question. And first I want to thank the Orient Association because this is very well thought out today. You've had a great panel of people, really qualified, wonderful people that really care about the resource and to be here to care about our community. So I really appreciate you having this today. Bob DeLuca laid out the history of what happened before. And so that was almost 20 years ago. And the concern then was that, is the town prepared? And we don't live in a vacuum, right? You look at the rest of Long Island, how it's developed, and you think, okay, so what is Southold supposed to look like? Southold looks the way it does today, and it's not an accident. There was a lot of planning that went into keeping Southold the character that it is and the quality of life that we have here. So how do we ensure that really for the next generation? So that's a really big question. At the time, we were undertaking the comprehensive plan, which was done. And we're also in a bit of a foot race with development here. Let's be honest. Land preservation is a voluntary process. So if you have land and if you want to either preserve it in the farmland preservation program or as open space, it's voluntary. We have a list of properties in town. There's a very good process. If you want to come in for appraisals and whatnot, the town can make you an offer. Suffolk County has been a very good partner in helping us fund these preservation efforts. But we know that it is a foot race in that there's a lot of development pressure here also. Why is it? Well, because it's nice, because you can go to the beach and you can swim when you want. People like Joe Fenora can raise oysters in the bay. Why? Because of the water quality here. We have the biggest oyster grower right here that you can see from here in New York State. Again, not by accident. The town's done a tremendous amount of work in trying to remediate stormwater, keep the pathogens out of the water, to facilitate shellfish production. You look at someone who was from the South Fork. Now, I've been there. It's very nice. But you've got a lot of traffic, right? And that's a result of planning. So they plan for that, basically. So when you look at the town's position, is really you have to look at every aspect of what this means. Because I was years ago I'll use myself as an example. So we have a farm and the road on either side, and the city water went up on either side. And I got a call from my neighbors, and they said, "Oh my gosh, there's water available. What should we do?" And I said, "You have to have your water tested so you're comfortable with what you have. You shouldn't hook up unless you think you should hook up." And many of them got their water tested, and many of them didn't. And some hooked up and some didn't, but they made informed decisions. And I think that's the way this community is really going, is to make an informed decision based on the whole scenario of your water quality and the impacts of having public water. When the town originally welcomed the Suffolk County Water Authority into town, the impact of that was immediate, because now you don't have to worry about the separation between wells and your neighbor's septic system. And so there was a lot of small lots that got developed immediately, because now there was public water, and the health department could bless it very easily and say, "Here's your building permit." And so this is not your building permit, but your health department approval, so you can get your building permit. So you're not issuing building permits yet, I hope not. So I think you have to look at every single aspect of this and make an informed decision on what you're comfortable with and what the community should look like in 10 years and in 20 years. Of course, sea level rise as a whole, everything is changing because of that, and it's very apparent. And I can't predict, the impacts of that. We're trying to do work on sea level rise because for our own infrastructure, road work, working with the county, trying to get the state to address their infrastructure. But I'm not sure how that's going to address the aquifer. One thing I do, if I could, one thing I do want to say, it's fact number 3. I took a look at that, and you can see what the water use is. And I know back in the 60s when I was a kid, and there was a lot of farm pumpage, and everything was potatoes back then. And every farm had a well, and every farm irrigated all summer long. And there was a prolonged drought in the 60s. But we never had a problem with saltwater intrusion because the demand was evenly spread out across the whole aquifer. So a public water supply well draws from one spot. So of course there's going to be stress on one place trying to supply everything. And I think the other thing the town is looking at, we did pass a lawn irrigation bill this year, and the whole purpose of that was, and you've seen it all over town, all over the county, people irrigating their lawns when it's raining. And so, working with the industry and the irrigation installers were very supportive because, they're professionals and they don't want to see that either. They want to see someone, if they want a green lawn and irrigate it, even with treated water, they don't want to see it wasted either because they know it's a public resource, it's a finite resource, and to waste it like that, to run it down the road or to waste it when it's raining is really wrong because it is a public resource. And so the industry was very supportive. We passed the lawn irrigation bill. We'd like to see it get passed county-wide because it is a very easy step towards water conservation. Joe Fenora laid out what their limitations are on Shelter Island as far as water, as far as their aquifer. And I think as a town, we have to look at that also of water use and what's really important. There's one hamlet that wasn't mentioned here today, and that's Fisher's Island, and they have their own water supply system also. And so they're kind of talk about the canary in the coal mine. How does their water supply relate to their water use? And they're very concerned about it. They have a very good water company, but they're very concerned also on managing that public resource.
Thank you so much. Joe Pokorny, I had one question that's always stuck in my mind, I think from the last pipeline discussion, which was that there were concerns here in Orient that water would actually flow from Orient in the other direction. And some of what we found about the amount of supply here and the depth made me think that that's unlikely, just because the aquifer here is thin and doesn't have a lot of water in it. But I just wanted to ask you that directly and kind of hear from you about, is that part of the plan? Is it a possibility? Is it unlikely that water would flow from Orient west?
Right, so that's a great question. So the first thing is, look, we're putting a pipeline in, right? That pipeline is not to take water out. That pipeline is to bring water into the area of Orient. And as Marianne has told you, and as the studies all tell you, that there's very thin aquifer. For us to extract water from Orient, first things, we need wells. So we would have to go and apply for and permit wells somewhere in Orient, connect them up to our system, and then pump them and pump the water off of Orient. It's very unlikely. It's like super remote that would ever even happen. I can't really imagine a scenario where that would happen. I mean, Orient needs water in itself. So if we did have wells in the area of Orient, that water would supply Orient. That water would be there for there. But I don't see that there's enough volume of water that we would pump from Orient and then move it the other way on the causeway to the main body of Southold. Well, you would have to get DEC approval, yeah. And again, you'd have to permit wells. So none of this just happens. So you have to go to the DEC in order to get a well permit. It's a big deal. So you have to go to, where's our friend from the DEC here? But you know, that process can take over a year just to get a permit. And when you apply for that permit, you've got to provide all the details on where that water is going to go and how you're going to use it. And then the wells that we would build, if we even build, I really can't imagine. Just looking at Orient, my thought is if we were going to supply all of Orient, we would probably put in some storage tanks. We'd probably put ground storage tanks in, and we would use this pipeline to fill those tanks during the off-peak period. And then during the peak period, we'd probably take some water from the pipeline, plus we would boost out of the tanks to provide the water for Orient. That's the most likely way to do it, because these small wells, if you go back into the main body of the island, we can put a 1,300 gallon a minute well in all day, anywhere. The town of Brookhaven, Smithtown, Huntington, you can put those wells and you can get huge volumes of water out of the ground. In Southold, a big well is 400 gallons a minute, and we only have a couple of them. We have wells in Southold that are 50 gallons a minute. Southold's aquifer is thicker than Orient's. So I can confidently tell you that in Orient, you're probably not going to have anything more than a 50 gallon a minute well. So in order to create any appreciable volume of water, we'd have to put in dozens of wells in order to do that. It's just not likely, and it's not cost effective. It would be much more cost effective, like I said, to put some storage tanks out there, fill them in the off-peak, discharge them during the peak, and that would supply you.
Super, thank you. That's very helpful, very clarifying. We just have a few minutes left, but I did want to open to questions from the audience in the back.
Is in no way, shape, or form a governmental agency, neither the state of New York nor Suffolk County. So your budget, you're funded by the people whom you provide services to.
Correct.
Okay. Second thing is you're doing two things now. You're doing an environmental review, and then you're going to build a pipeline. The environmental review is going to be broader than the pipeline. Is that correct? In terms of space that you're going to.
You know, honestly, I didn't want to debate the pipeline.
I'm not. No, I just want to. I just want to understand what you're doing. Not. I have no view on that right now. How far is the pipeline going to go? Is it red up to a certain point and then dotted afterwards?
This is the connection from the existing system in Southold to that survey area in Orient. That's all this is. This is the very eastern end of a new connection that might be made to serve the survey area in Orient. The pipeline we're talking about is all the way to the west.
Could you say that? A blue line? I only see red.
So if you take a look, so here's the causeway, right? This is just to the west of us.
Yeah.
We have a water main that stops right about there where my cursor is.
They can't see your cursor.
I'm sorry, you can't see. So all the way to the west here on this picture, we have a water main that terminates right there.
So it's an existing water main.
There's
that
an existing
terminates.
water main right there. We would pick up from that on the other side of the causeway, extend the water main out here to Orient, and serve this area that has been designated by the health department as a survey area where people have contaminated wells with PFAS.
Okay, so the environmental review is only in connection with a possible extension. Is that correct?
The environmental review starts with the main project, which I showed on the other slide, which is the overall connection to Flanders.
Okay.
Right? That's
this
is the main pipeline here. This you see down there in the Crotcher Riverhead, down in Flanders there. That's where the connection is made to our existing system, and it's run through the town of Riverhead to the town line, where we have a large water main right there. We would connect to that to then push water into Southold.
Into Southold.
Into Southold.
So,
now we're all the way on the east end of this line.
Okay, so basically what the environmental review is intended to do is to analyze what you're going to do in Southold.
Well, it's to analyze this, right? This is the major part of the analysis, right? Because this is the big action, bringing water from Flanders to Southold. That's the major action. But when you do an environmental review, you need to look at all the tangential things you're going to do. One of the tangential things may be to bring water to Orient. And so in a matter of being conservative and being transparent and making sure, we cover all the bases, we added that section of Orient.
Okay. So how would then the input come from people who live in Orient at some point as to potential usage of that pipeline? Because we don't have any political entity other than the town of Southold.
So we go ahead.
Okay.
So they conducted a scoping session, and comments were there's quite a few comments. There's probably 100 people there at the scoping session run by Suffolk County Water Authority about this, and all the comments need to be answered. And we're going to get the comments back, the answers, and then we're going to have to analyze them. And they came from the community. And we're going to see if we think that those comments are satisfactory. Don't forget, New York State, and this is part of the problem here. New York State is allowing the people selling you the water to conduct the review of selling you the water and the impacts thereof. And this is a deficiency in New York State, right? But we, as a town, get to review those answers, and we, as a town, get to say, oh yeah, that makes sense, or wait a second, you didn't really consider the impacts here. So we're going to have to do a complete review once we get those.
We have a couple other questions. Liz?
Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I'm Liz Galuli. I'm one of your town trustees, and I'm definitely one of these people on the front line of this development pressure. I deal with it every single month. I was wondering if Mr. DeLuca, maybe you could talk about some of the deficiencies of zoning as a defense against this development pressure that will come with public water. I think a lot of people here at home suffer from saltwater intrusion and some of these issues, some PFAS issues. So if there was an idea that you could bring the water and not have any development pressure, then everybody would be for it, right? So I think the question is, with your experience on the South Fork, what kind of pressure do you see, and what should we be most concerned about with that?
Sure. And maybe just to start that, right? So the State Environmental Quality Review Act, which is the process under which all of this review is taking place, specifically asks agencies to look at growth inducement. So it's a real thing. What the real thing usually looks like is, over time, and I would say it also parallels rising values in property. What somebody can do with their property or wants to do with their property, or maybe a real estate person told them they might be able to do with their property, all ends up on a board like our trustees or the town board when somebody says, oh, well, I can't really do it now under the rules. However, can I vary this standard? Can I vary that standard? Can I change the zone? Can I make an argument to you that the zoning which is on this property isn't really appropriate because I have a really cool use in mind, and you should, maybe you want a small resort, a boutique resort, because this is a resort community, and why shouldn't we have more of those? And again, I'm not judging it. All I'm saying is this is the kind of thing that happens. So over time, particularly in areas where you have escalating values, and particularly in areas like this, which are absolutely beautiful, which are very desirable, the reality is there is a huge and hot market for doing more with properties than you might otherwise be able to do, and people will put their shoulder into getting that done. I can tell you right now, in the town of East Hampton, they spent about 12 years figuring out how to limit house size. They got that finally passed last year, let's say, and already there is a rising tide of people coming after it, trying to stop it. And part of the argument is, hey, listen, I paid $1 bazillion for this piece of property. When I bought it, I thought I could build an 8,500 square foot house here, and now you're telling me it can only be 6,500 square feet. And this is a real argument. And as I said at the hearing, this only happens out here, but this is the kind of thing that people, I can only have 8 bedrooms. What am I going to do? So, that's the kind of cartoon we live in, for better or worse. And we should really think about that, because what concerns me most is that that falls on a town to make a decision, a planning board, a zoning board, a town board. And again, it's not the water authority's job to fix that problem. But what happens is, through, again, unintended consequences, the more available the resource, you also see this with the availability of electricity or anything else, the more likely it is that somebody will give it a try. And because the win that you get by giving it a try is so big, it's a lottery ticket. So how much money are you prepared to spend to try to persuade a board to see things your way, particularly when you have the values that are here? And interestingly, right along the most vulnerable areas in terms of sea level rise, saltwater intrusion, and you're essentially living out here on an island, even though there's a causeway. And you have to also wonder about what happens to a pipeline in a Category 5 hurricane if you've all connected yourselves to the pipeline. So there's a lot of things to look at, but Liz's point is really well taken, which is it's the death of 1,000 cuts. Not one application, it's not 2 applications, it's dozens of applications. And if you ever see a trustee's agenda, you will see loads of, hey, what about maybe the pool could be closer to the bluff, maybe the house could bump out, maybe I could just do all this stuff and it would be really cool, and somebody told me I could, and you guys should give it to me. And then if you ever gave one away, they come back and remind you of something you did 14 years ago and say, you know what, you should do it again because you gave it to that guy. So this is like what we're living with. And I think from the water authority's perspective, they're like, we're just bringing clean water to people. Like, what's the problem? And I totally get that. But I'm on the other side of the equation, which is somebody comes in and says, I know it's a 1/4 acre lot, but why can't I have 17,000 square feet? And why shouldn't I be able to go up 36 feet? It just is real. And I think, one of the things that we recommended in our scoping comments to the water authority is a very productive and ongoing dialogue between the water authority and the town, in a way that you have a discussion like this often. And this is something that Scott Russell specifically pointed out the last time we did this, which was there was a time in Southold town when there was a water map that was kind of agreed to by the town board. They said, okay, this is where the public water is. Water authority said, got it. Town said, got it. And in this particular instance, however we got there, the water authority said, I know, but you know what? We got this money, we got the pipe, and here we go. And it really turned into like a head-on collision. Whatever. But the reality is the town thought there was kind of this dialogue, and I would heavily recommend that dialogue continue, because that's the way you get to better long-term planning, in addition to all this work that the Orient Association did to give everybody an elevated understanding of what's going on and a sense of urgency about the importance of doing it the right way as best as you can, so you don't stumble into a mess you didn't plan on and nobody's really, we just approved that application and we just brought the pipe and I don't know what happened, and then you live with the consequences. And I'm like, this is my life for like 40, I'm telling you, it just goes on and on. But it's always the same, it's like always the same pattern. And so I just offer you all as much as you can do to save your community, as crazy as it may seem now. 10 years from now, people are going to be going, you know what they should have done? they should have done something to protect this or do that. So let's try to do it now so that 10 years from now, if it's still standing, I could say, great, you guys, you're about as close as you're going to get as a community organization to being in the right direction. I can tell you that. So bless you and stay with it, and maybe we'll get to the right place.
On that note, thank you, panelists. Really awesome job. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's a little bit over time, but really, really appreciate all of our panelists and all of you sticking out the 3.5 hours of talk about water. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a great Saturday.